City Council meeting to order. And before we take the roll, I would just like to let you know that Mayor Stewart gives her regrets. She's not able to join us tonight. Ms. Ledlow may have more information.
I don't have a lot. There was a family medical emergency, and she's not available to be here this evening.
All right. I thank you. I'm going to do my best to keep us in order here. I appreciate your assistance on that. If the city manager or city clerk would now call the roll, appreciate it.
Okay, Mayor Stewart, Mayor Pro Tem Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Kovar.
Here.
Councilmember Dubala.
Here.
Councilmember Kostick. Here. Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Searcy. Here.
All right, I thank you. And we're going to start tonight's meeting with a public hearing on the traffic calming on 5th Avenue between Orchard Avenue and Eastern Avenue. If anyone cares to speak, you may. Do we have a list tonight? Okay. But when we do speak tonight, either at this public hearing or at the public comments later, if you would please state your name, come to the podium and state your name and address, and then keep your comments to 3 minutes. I appreciate your assistance on that because we do want to have a nice meeting tonight. And I would also ask that if anyone can't come to the podium, if you just raise your hand and we'll get a microphone to you. All right, so for the traffic calming public hearing, anyone have comments on that? Was anyone signed up?
No, there was none.
Okay. Now, if you want to go to the podium, if you have comments on that.
I would note that we did receive 5 written comments on this traffic calming. Just in the event there's no one here, I would say that we did receive comments.
Okay, great.
Written comments.
All right. Thank you. Well, then we'll call this public hearing to a close and move on. We have go through the rolling agenda, upcoming meetings. We have a special council meeting on Monday night, the 23rd, on the city council budget. And then Wednesday is our normal.
The other thing on Monday night, we will be having a presentation on the preliminary traffic information about Tacoma Junction. That will happen first before the budget work session. And so that was a late addition. There won't be public comments, but we're looking forward to having an opportunity for people to see that information before the Wednesday meeting.
Okay, great. And then on Wednesday the 25th, the meeting will start at 6:30. Please make a special note of that because our meetings normally start later. And there will be public hearing on the constant yield tax rate and also on the budget. We will also be voting on the 100% exemption of 100% of inventory from the business personal property tax, and be voting on an ordinance authorizing a contract for computers, software, and support for the Computer Learning Center, and then a work session on the traffic and circulation for the Tacoma Junction project. The following Monday, the 30th, again, will be a budget work session. And then on Wednesday, May 2nd, is our regular council meeting. And again, we'll be working on the budget. Copies of this rolling agenda are available on the city website or available from the city clerk if you need one. All right. If we want to start our public comment session first with any of the items on our agenda tonight that we'll be voting on. And so the first one is the ordinance exempting 100% of inventory from the business personal property tax. Yes, thank you.
Laura Barclay with the Old Tacoma Business Association. The Board of Directors.
I'm sorry, no, this is my problem here. I'm working on it. I got it. There you go. Try it again.
Okay, can you hear me?
I have a statement from the Board of Directors of the Old Tacoma Business Association, where I'm here to thank council for their leadership on this issue and to state publicly that the Board of Directors of the Old Tacoma Business Association is in full support of the full elimination of the inventory portion of the personal property tax, and we look forward to following the discussions throughout the upcoming fiscal year and determining the direction that's proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments on the inventory tax? If not, we'll move on to the next item, which is the resolution ratifying the collective bargaining agreement between the union and the City of Tacoma Park. Any comments on that? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next. I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. Could we please get a microphone to Mr. Lovelace?
Okay, this is Pat Lovelace, your official peace delegate. And I live at 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park, Maryland. Ward 4. And one thing I'd like to do is when you guys discuss this about the city workers, I want you to really think you're making the right decision, because they've been apparently working things out, and I like to hear that. But I'd like to see them work out things. If they have any more problem, they would feel free to come to the city council, and that they wouldn't. City will negotiate with their lawyers whenever necessary. Negotiate with the union whenever necessary, because it's not like Tacoma Park to just not want to negotiate. You know, because I think that's part of being Tacoma Park. You know, we don't want to have the stigma of kicking our workers down, keeping them in submission. I don't want to see that. I want to see the workers treated fairly, justly, and appropriately. And if it requires a meeting with the union, that's what the union is for, to air out their grievances. And we should listen. Right away, we should listen, discuss it, and then take appropriate action.
Well, thank you,
Yeah,
Mr. Lovelace.
thank you very much for letting me speak. Love it, love it, love it.
All right, thank you. Any other comments on the resolution for the union contract? If not, are there any comments on the resolution providing for the appointments to the Noise Control Board? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to public comments on any other items. Again, you can step to the podium if you have comments. And I see Mr. Lovelace again. Go ahead.
Yes, this is Pat Lovelace again, official priest delegate. 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park. One thing I want to bring to your attention is the sidewalk on the public sidewalk where it joins onto the municipal sidewalk, the building, where you enter the building, has a real high ridge on it, a bump of some kind where it joins onto the city property, and we haven't fixed that yet. And my wheelchair keeps banging on it really hard, and that's a real violation of my vertebra, if you know what I mean. It makes my back hurt. And I'd like to see if you people can fix that as much as possible, as quickly as possible, because that's the appropriate thing to do. Because it's, I'd hate to see a kid go over that on a skateboard or a bicycle and tip over. I'd hate to see that. So please fix that defect in the sidewalk out there. Also, the 14th coming up is National Day of the Weed, 4/20. And they'll be having demonstrations down in Washington and other areas around the country. And it celebrates the first states to legalize the use of marijuana for medical needs and other needs. And I'd like to see people come out to that and support it. Because yes, marijuana does have a lot of pain-killing benefits and it's not as dangerous as the opiates. Matter of fact, I don't know anyone who's ever died from it. And if you want to take a serious bite out of the opiate problem, that's one step we can do, because it's not going to kill anybody. And I asked somebody one time, would you rather see your son stoned on marijuana or dead on fentanyl? And I'd rather see them taking marijuana if they have to take something. So also, on this gun control, we got to continue working with our congressmen and our senators to make sure we can take appropriate action on that, because it's really gotten out of hand. We had another shooting the other day. Not a massive one, but we did have another shooting. Every day I'm hearing someone getting shot. So please, let's bring an end to that. Let's bring an end to the gun violence and bring a beginning of peace, because that guns are showing us that war has come home to the hood. It's no longer in the Middle East or in Korea or in Central America. The war has come home to the hood, and we must now do something about it. Thank you very much. Peace.
Thank you.
Love it, love it, love it.
All right, thank you. Anyone else?
Arthur David Olson, Hancock Avenue. The city handles sidewalks both on city roads and state roads. SHA stands for State Highway Administration, not State Highway and Sidewalk Administration. In recent years, the city has budgeted $500,000 a year for new sidewalks and $500,000 for retrofitting sidewalks for compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. This year's budget increases the total ADA sidewalk amount to $700,000, so the grand sidewalk total increases 20%. That sizable increase warrants attention. I'm worried about discrepancies between the FY18 and FY19 budgets. In last year's budget, page 96 mentioned the plan to complete remaining work in Ward 1. Page 165 showed $300,000 to be spent on city sidewalks and $200,000 on SHA sidewalks, and then for nothing to be spent on city sidewalks and $500,000 on SHA sidewalks in FY19. That's last year's budget. In this year's budget, page 100 mentions the plan to complete remaining work in Ward 1 and 4 and begin repairs along SHA roadways. Page 172 shows $409,000 to be spent on city sidewalks, $91,000 to be spent using block grant funds without specifying whether that will be city or state work, and $200,000 on SHA sidewalks. Last year's budget didn't mention city sidewalk ADA work in Ward 4. This year's does, and increases the amount for doing the work. I hope the council will ask about that change, and hope it will ask if we're confident that we've now identified all needed city sidewalk ADA work. The mention of starting state sidewalk ADA work next year, combined with the continued budgeting for city sidewalk ADA work this next year, may mean that ADA work is not being done this year. I hope the council will ask whether ADA work is being done this year, and if not, why not? At the bottom line, even though I walk rather than driving or biking, I hope the council will keep total ADA sidewalk spending at $500,000. I hope the council will wait on starting SHA work until work on city sidewalks is complete. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Susan and Teddy Ewing.
And I live on 7103 13th Avenue, and me and my friends wanted park renovation for Hillwood Manor Park because we just wanted to add more things to it.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Love it.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Landman. I'm a resident of Ward 1. I'm here to talk about the Tacoma Junction project. We have had an extensive community process to define what it is that we want and need at the junction. And the council has spelled out our concerns about the proposed design with the resolution that you adopted. I'm here to ask you to please stick to your guns and insist that those design concerns be addressed in the final design, and if not, that you do what you need to do and vote no. To be clear, the current proposal that you are going to be talking about later on this evening falls short. It puts traffic safety and the co-op at significant and unnecessary risk. Here are my chief concerns. First of all, with respect to smart growth and conservation, the co-op likely cannot survive, much less thrive, with the current design. Deliveries, parking, and access will not work. I remind you that this co-op is a major community asset with over 9,000 members, that the city purchased this land specifically to ensure that the co-op could remain a number of years ago. Numerous co-op suppliers have said they can't and won't use the proposed lay-by as designed, that they'll either have to obstruct traffic or simply stop servicing the co-op if that design is adopted. And the design truly is disrespectful of co-op customers. It's put the elevator for the parking garage as far away as possible from the grocery store, as if they want to make it more difficult for co-op users to continue to park there. With respect to smart growth and public safety, another factor you're discussing tonight, large trucks that are parked at the lay-by as designed at the site by NDA would block street views for walkers and bikers at a place where safety is already a concern. Concerns about the bus stop location, crosswalks, lines of sight, and pedestrian and vehicle interactions, which are so critical for smart growth, have simply been punted or put off for decision later. We cannot approve a design like that when so many key safety questions are not clarified. And the fire chief has expressed concern that the current design will block fire trucks. I can remember how our multi-year effort to redesign the site where the fire station is to ensure the fire safety of our community, and that was a multi-year process. It is amazing to me to think that the city would now sign off on a design that undercuts fire safety. Third, with respect to public space, the usable public space we now enjoy, which is not very elegant, is still much beloved and much used, not just for parking, but for city favorites like Food Truck Fridays and Earth Day and the Beer Fest, which I forget the name of. In sum, the tiny public space that's designed into the NDA proposal would be a net loss for the community with respect to a number of activities we already enjoy. And let me just conclude procedurally that you have not set aside adequate time to consider the SHA's comments on traffic, because you're receiving the traffic safety study less than 21 days before you're voting on it, and they have said that they need 21 days to review the proposal, comment on it, and propose any needed mitigation. So I believe you need to look at that schedule to ensure adequate time for SHA's comment.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Leah Andrag. I live at 7218 13th Avenue, Tacoma Park. I'm Ward 6, Talicia's ward. So that little girl who came up and spoke is my neighbor. I have 2 children, and I'm here because we've been looking at some new parks that have been being built in Tacoma, and they're beautiful. And our park, which I love dearly, is unfortunately a little decrepit, a little unsafe. It's made of wood and it's kind of fallen apart a bit, and there's some issues with kids falling through spaces in the playground. My son's fallen through quite a few times, and as much as I love and cherish that playground, I think that there's some safety issues that need to be addressed. I don't know if it needs to be rebuilt. I think it's about 20 years old. But so I just came to bring up some concerns about the safety. It's not like kids falling off. It's like kids falling through spaces. So maybe if you guys could allocate some money or do something to help us with the Hillwood Manor Playground, that would be awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm Gertrude Mögner from Ward 1, 2. This is also about the Tacoma Junction. And it's just sort of a summary, really. The latest plan by the developer of the Tacoma Junction shows really no improvement, has not addressed the previously identified problems. The community wanted space for gathering and socializing. There's none. The developer shows an illustration of people and children sitting on a little strip behind a low fence next to the unloading of delivery trucks and next to a very busy street. The building is designed for having restaurant space. There's no provision for adequate and safe food delivery. Waste removal for the restaurant is not properly planned. The community has expressed a desire to retain the food co-op, which is an essential resource in our community. The food co-op, a neighborhood store, allows people to walk, bicycle, and drive to it. The offering of the food co-op is unique, and it was the only resource to get food in past snowstorm emergencies. The developer was uncooperative so far and has still not identified means of safe delivery of food and waste removal. Therefore, since the developer has not addressed any of the concerns of the community in the revised proposal, it is our recommendation to cease business with the developer. Furthermore, we recommend that an ad hoc citizen group be appointed to develop a new vision of the Tacoma Junction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bernita Leonard. I live at 208 Manor Circle. My husband and I have lived in the Tacoma Junction for over 30 years. We built our house on Manor Circle, and we own a contributing historic building on Carroll Avenue at the opposite end of where the Spring Mill Bakery is. We built our business here, Heritage Building and Renovation, and we've raised our 3 children here. We have made a considerable investment in this town. We love it here. A lot of what is unique about the city of Tacoma Park is that in the midst of a very urban area, we've maintained a sort of charming small town uniqueness that is conducive to small businesses, unique small businesses. And through the decades, we've had to fight to maintain historic houses and streets and trees from overdevelopment. The proposal for the junction appears to be an example of overdevelopment. The proposed plan is just too large for that space. We're not objecting to development per se, but this plan threatens the co-op grocery store, a vital resource in our area, and it may also negatively affect the other small businesses across the street. Those buildings across the street on Carroll Avenue are part of the historic district. They're closing in on 100 years old. From personal experience, I can tell you that when a large, heavy truck rolls past our building, the vibration can be felt. Our buildings kind of shake. They're a little fragile. And this plan is proposing an extensive, very deep excavation for a planned parking garage. I really fear what large, heavy trucks roaring through that area are going to do to these fragile historic buildings. So I'd like to see a plan that is more appropriately fit for our community, one that has welcoming green areas and places for community gatherings outdoors, such as concerts or special events, one that includes adequate access so that these large trucks are not parked in a lay-by or potentially double parked, blocking traffic in an already overstressed, very busy intersection. If we don't address the issue of the trucks, I'm afraid we're going to have trouble addressing it afterwards. It would be hard to fix that particular aspect. So please consider that those of us that live and work in Tacoma Junction are really very concerned. We want to keep it a safe, healthy, pleasant place to live and work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello there. My name is Carter Doherty, Crescent Place, Ward 1. As I was reminded yesterday evening, about 100 yards as the crow flies from Tacoma Junction. One of the topics today is public space, and I wanted to start with some numbers on this. NDC is proposing about 2,700 square feet of public space, but I was told conceivably north of 3,000 feet. That's a little more than 10% of the total retail square footage of the development. B.Y. Morrison, aka the underused parcel across from the co-op, is a little less than 2,100 square feet. The red brick part of the Tacoma Park gazebo on Carroll Avenue across from Roscoe's Pizzeria is about 2,400 square feet. So to be clear, that this proposed design by the developer would be larger than what is arguably the main public space in Tacoma Park, and indeed for many small towns around the United States, which is the gazebo. That really surprised me, and I would encourage you to take those numbers to heart. Examining the renderings did not drive that home, not for me at least. So I hope the council will consider this fact highly. That seems to be a pretty good start if, as, for example, my Ward 1 council member, Peter Kovar, has expressed interest in public space. That's something to think about. There's also a fair case to make that we should consider the retail space in the proposed site as a contribution to the public realm, even if it's not technically public. Now, let me say contribution to the public realm, and my reasoning is provided, interestingly enough, by the neighboring Tacoma Park Silver Spring Co-op. We've heard much over the last few years of debate that the co-op is a community resource, and I don't doubt that. But I don't think we say that because of the few picnic tables outside of the co-op, most of which are actually on the city property next door. It's because people run into each other, interact with each other, and make merry and mischief there. And I've done actually a surprising amount of advocacy for my views about Tacoma Junction actually on co-op property. But the public space that actually is on co-op property right now is about 15 by 20 feet. I sort of paced it out myself. 300 square feet maybe, and right now it's being displaced by the products of springtime, the mulch, soil, and vegetable seedlings. So, lest we apply double standards, either the new development is making a contribution to public space via its retail space, or the co-op should be required to dedicate a similar portion of its space to being public. Finally, talking to various Tacoma Parkers, I did come across one, I thought, an innovative idea, which is to make sure that there's rentable public space in the development, so that you could use it for special occasions. It's worth some thought. Maybe the NDC could explore that with some tenants. Better usage of the roof would be nice, though I understand there are exit and entry issues with a space like that. In any case, we're on track, so onward.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Stephen Tellis, 7221 Cedar Avenue. I'm a professor at Johns Hopkins University, and I'm not quite an expert, but I've just written a book that partially deals with the impact of zoning requirements on spiraling housing costs. I just wanted to address one very small issue, but one that's been part of the larger discussion here, which is analysis by Michael Schuman of the proposed project, and just really one very small issue, but that I think has become part of the discourse around this, which is the question of whether or not the city is providing a subsidy to the developer. Mr. Schuman claims that the city is, in fact, providing a subsidy, and that the developer should be charged what he calls market rent. At the same time, he argues that the project should be subject to a number of non-market requirements, in particular that tenants be locally owned, which he doesn't specify, and that they be subject to, quote, reasonable commercial rent restrictions. These principles are internally inconsistent. First, Mr. Schuman makes no effort to demonstrate the developer is not, in fact, paying market rent. In addition, he apparently does not believe that a developer should in fact be charged market rent because of his requirement that all tenants have these constraints on their ability to actually operate like a market actor, including the restrictions that they only have local people or local people in the project. Even more important at this point, Mr. Schuman seems to be putting the interest of the very small number of, quote, local people who would potentially be tenants in the development over the much larger number of local people who would be employees in the development. There are a large number of residents of Tacoma Park, including a great number who live just a few blocks from the development, who would benefit from an increase in local employment opportunities. In fact, local employment opportunities that require precisely the level of development that others here have bemoaned. Every effort to reduce that amount of development both has the effect of taking something away from the people who would be shopping there, but also from the very many people who would be working in the development. So shrinking the level of the development has the consequence both of affecting people who would shop there and who would work there, and by giving a very large subsidy to the very small number of local people who might actually put themselves into the project, they make the potential people who are renting there less stable, probably have less employment opportunities, and therefore damage the effect, especially of less wealthy people in our neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Rachel Hardwick, President of the Board of the Co-op. We met today with NDC and expect to meet again for further discussions. Serious concerns remain, including NDC is not making any accommodation for the co-op's trash and recycling storage or trash and recycling removal. Disruption of the co-op's deliveries during the construction period will be more prolonged and more serious than we realized, possibly lasting for months. Many issues related to parking in the garage need to be discussed further with NDC after they have worked up their costs, including the cost of providing parking to co-op employees and customers and how to manage storage and retrieval of grocery carts. NDC agreed to send a copy of the traffic study to us and the data behind it at the same time city representatives receive it, and we understand that that will be before Monday. We urge the city to allow for as much time as possible for all stakeholders to digest and comment on the traffic study before approving the site plan. To be clear, the co-op is not against development. In fact, we submitted a proposal in response to the city's RFP, but we implore the council to get this right. Let's make sure that the development accommodates all users of the junction and the trash, recycling, parking, deliveries, and business needs of current and future businesses, including the co-op. Thank you.
Thank you.
Robert Anderson, Woodland Avenue, Vice President of the Co-op Board, as if you didn't know at this particular point. Just a quick note about a previous comment. With call for the co-op to offer more public space, I'd like to remind everyone that the co-op is on private property. The development is on public land, a plot of land owned by all of us. And it's disingenuous to suggest that these two properties are in any way analogous. Thank you.
Kaylee Ganud, Crossroads Professional Building. I'm thrilled to be in front of the council tonight to introduce myself as the new executive director of the Tacoma Langley Crossroads Development Authority. Not to disrupt the flow of these great public comments we've been having, but as I've been getting out and meeting our membership base, I've met some businesses that have been in the Crossroads area for 20, 30 years, maybe more. They were some of the original pioneers who saw the possibilities for that commercial district. And now we're at a new stage and we have new eyes on our district and new opportunities such as the Purple Line. And we look forward to finding and meeting new friends, new businesses, new developers that can contribute to the dynamic, multicultural, exciting, vibrant commercial district that we have over there. And I look forward to working with all of you as we continue that process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Council. Vern Kelly, Ward 3. I own 2 houses, 4 lots in the city. I pay a lot of property tax. The budget is asking for, Suzanne has asked for, economic development personnel. Having studied environmental studies and architecture as an undergrad and then going to graduate school in landscape architecture, we look at economic development through the lens of environmental impact, quality of life, open space, master planning. I've served on 2 master planning advisory groups for our county, the Purple Line Master Plan Advisory Group and the Tacoma Park East Silver Spring Master Plan Advisory Group. I was also on the walkable committees, and I chaired the Transportation Environment Committee for the Prince George's Chamber of Commerce. I take a broad look at things. I don't see our planners in this city taking a very broad look at the fact that the Washington Christian McLaughlin School, the Seventh-day Adventist property, Johns Nevins Andrews property, and the Junction will all have put a large strain on our adequate public facilities, on our environment, on our congestion, on the safety of Poplar Avenue becoming a major conduit to New Hampshire Avenue to get to JNA or to get to the Washington Christian McLaughlin School. What's going to happen if all of our traffic is in road rage, in bad quality air, late for picking up their children? It's a dangerous situation. I implore our city to hire somebody with credentials that satisfy the master planning process that we so sorely lack in this town. And beyond that, there's a plan back there which has 35,000 square feet of development on it and 17,000 square feet of open space, for example. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stephen Kern, Woodland Avenue. Allow me to describe what the junction negotiations have looked like to some of us, many of us perhaps. NDC tells you they need 5,000 square feet in order to make the project viable, and you say, seems a little big, but if that's what they need, carry on. NDC tells you, we'll give you a couple of thousand square feet max for a public space, and you say, wish we had more, but if that's what's necessary, carry on. NDC tells you a service road is out of the question, and you say, well, gee, you're the experts, carry on. From here, it looks like NDC has all the leverage, that they're getting everything they want. Why is that? We own the lot. Why aren't we dictating terms? I see 3 possibilities. 1, A, this, in fact, is your vision. This is what you've always wanted. This is what your constituency is demanding. B, you don't care. C, it's the best deal you think you can get. Start with A. Do you really, truly want a 50,000 square foot building with underground parking in our historic neighborhood? B, you don't care. I'm going to scratch this option because I know all of you are dedicated to finding a compromise that will bring all sides together, that will win a collective cheer from the city. That leaves option C. You think this is the best deal you can get. It looks to me like this is where you are. So let's examine the art of negotiation for a moment. There are a lot of theories out there, sure, but in my experience as an entrepreneur and a poker player, there's a singular truth. The moment you're not willing to walk away, you've lost. The moment you're not willing to walk away, you've lost. Are you willing to walk away? Honestly, I've seen few, if any, signs. A few of you drew a line in the sand in response to the addition of a 3rd level, but wasn't that a ruse from the start? I believe NDC showed their hand with the most recent so-called revision. Not complying with the October resolutions was calculated and confident. NDC is smiling because they think they're going to win the pot, and that's because they think you don't have the guts to fold and play another hand. Why is that? Is it because of the Fred Schultz axiom that if you can't get this deal done, no other developer will ever come knocking again? Come on, this is a specious argument. I hope that's not it. I urge you now to have the guts to tell NDC this plan is too big for the junction. Take it to New Hampshire Avenue or size it for the neighborhood. I urge you to tell them if they won't, you'll find someone who will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keith Kozloff, Sycamore Avenue, Ward 3. Just a couple comments on the topics for tonight of sustainability and public space. I want to focus on transportation sustainability. And as you may recall, I sent a relatively lengthy list of suggestions on this topic to the council a few weeks ago, so I'm not going to go through them again. But I do want to highlight that I believe increased congestion from the redevelopment project is not a fait accompli if the city takes a leadership role on that issue. And as I proposed in the paper, the council could, for example, establish an ambitious goal of no net increase in single occupancy vehicle trips to the junction, regardless of the final project design and who the tenants are, and then would work with all relevant parties to develop a comprehensive initiative in support of that goal. Turning to public space, as a community, we're going to have disagreements about the size and the placement of public space in this project. For example, I happen to think that some consideration should be given to on-site resources for public space besides the area currently designated in front of the project, such as the side that faces the wooded area in the back, which is a resource, and even the green roof. Or even an interior courtyard could be designed as a rather cozy urban living room, especially if the overall project was designed to be porous and so it contributed to public access and connection with the building's retail units and pedestrian network. But that's my idea, and whatever size and placement of public space that different neighbors might propose, any design of that space is only a means to an end. Because when we're speaking about open public space, the architecture may provide the stage, the urban context, the theater, economic realities frame transactional opportunities and constraints, but it's the people who make the play. It's the people that activate the space, give it its soul, define its success, and ultimately it's going to need to be a partnership between the city, private sector on both sides of the junction, and community engagement that will define the success of the junction as a whole, and that should be the test of any design. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Karen Elrich, Ward 5. I've come to all these meetings from the very beginning when we chose between the four pieces of property, the way the property would look. And again and again and again and again, it has been overwhelming from the people that are talking to you that we don't want this big thing, not the way it is, overwhelmingly. So I just have one question. What do we have to do as the people of Tacoma Park to tell you this is not what we want? This is not the way we want it. We do not want this giant development at that corner. And whether you have to have a referendum where you ask people, are there people out there that I haven't seen here? What, we've had 3, 4, 5 people at the most that come up here and say, great, do it? Overwhelmingly, 90% of the people say this is not what we want. That's what Tacoma Park is about, listening to the people in the community. If you can prove to me that there are other people out there saying, yes, go ahead, please do that so I can trust my community again. I have never felt this upset about my city council, ever. I've been here over 35 years. And it's not because of the development, it's because of the process. Because overwhelmingly, this entire room says, hey guys, this is not what we want. What do we have to do? Do we have to lay ourselves in front of the diggers? Because we will. We've done it before. And we will do it again. And it's not going to be pretty. And I don't want to get into a battle with a progressive city that's supposed to be looking at what we can do differently to save our environment, to save our children. We're standing at a precipice with our environment. And what are we building? A place to buy fancy shoes and eat a nice dinner? Instead of something that gives back to our community, that says, yes, we can make this place better for our grandchildren. I don't see it. I don't understand how you can sit up there and make that decision. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Taisha Powell. I represent Bikram Hot Yoga. Just like most of the community, we are also super concerned about everything with the junction. We're really concerned about the aspect of small businesses. So we ask that you take into account what this will do to the small businesses in the area in regards to taxes, rent going up, and things like that, as well as the traffic that will happen in the junction as well, too. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Janice Totham Davies from Ward 3 from Poplar Avenue. I want to know why the council, and it's just the council from the start, have been pushing this down our throats, even though we've come out against it. If you want a vote on this project that we don't want, let's have a referendum of the whole of everyone in Tacoma Park. It's the council who's been pushing this, especially Kate Stewart, from the start. You've just removed the electric charging station from that car park and stuck it on Carroll Avenue, right by a bus stop and the opening to the car park there, which is ridiculous, because two cars can charge there at a time, and the bus won't be able to stop. And people getting in and out of that car park is going to be dangerous. You have no right to continually push this when you haven't got the consent of us. You've been spending our tax dollars on this, on designs, on pushing. NDC have had their own way, basically. And that's the only car park at that end of town. There are empty spaces all over Tacoma Park. In Tacoma, DC, where Busboys and Poets are, that space hasn't been filled. There are empty offices and empty spaces all over Tacoma Park. You don't need to develop this. You could make it a lot nicer. People have talked about the blacktop. It's awful. It's not energy. It's terrible. It's against the climate. You can change the blacktop. It doesn't have to be a blacktop. There are so many things you could do, but all of you have pushed this. One of the first votes I came to, there was everyone for it except one who was against it. After 3 hours in the Tacoma Park, your little paper, it came out that it was a unanimous vote. So somebody, and I know who, was made to change their mind so that it was unanimous. Ask the people what they want, because we haven't said yes to this.
Good evening, Mark Sherman, Hancock Avenue. Last week I asked the question, what is the problem that we're trying to solve in the junction? And I suggested that revitalizing the junction was not a problem anymore. It may have looked that way a few years ago, but at this point, all storefronts in the junction are spoken for, and it's actually a very vital place. So tonight I want to talk about some of the actual problems that are present in the junction and that deserve our attention. I'm focusing on traffic today, and I want to ask you to imagine someone driving into the junction coming from New Hampshire Avenue. Arriving at the junction, she wants to park and purchase some groceries. So her first choice is to try to turn into the little parking lot on Sycamore. But as she tries to do that, she has to wait for the oncoming traffic going in the other direction, going towards New Hampshire, to give her a chance to make that left-hand turn into the lot. And if you've seen what happens, you know what I'm talking about. That one car trying to turn left into the little parking lot holds up all the vehicles behind her on Ethan Allen. Her other option, of course, is to keep going and try to turn into the big parking lot. Same thing. She tries to turn left, she's going to hold up the traffic behind her as she waits for a gap in the 2 lanes of traffic going east. I saw that this afternoon. I have video. It's not a pretty sight. Now take the driver coming from the other direction, coming from Old Town or Silver Spring. Your first choice is to try to turn into the big lot, and you can turn right to get into that lot. But how do you get out of that lot and go back the way you came? Because if you turned right to get into the lot, you're going to want to turn left coming out to go back where you came from. Turning left out of the big parking lot is a real problem. It's a problem today. It's not a problem that would occur if we did something. It's a problem right now, and it should be solved. And again, I've got lots of video of this. It's awful to see what happens as cars beg for a chance to get through the 2 lanes of traffic going east so that they can go west. Someone coming from Old Town or Silver Spring can also try to go down to the little lot, and if they do that, they have to exit at the rear and wait for the light at Sycamore. Some people are not willing to do that. You've also got people trying to turn left coming out of RS Automotive and crossing those 2 lanes of traffic to get into the eastbound lanes, and you've got people at the new Montessori school trying to turn left. All these left-hand turns within this 1-block stretch are very problematic because it's not just a single highway, it's a double highway. That's why it's 4 lanes. This is a real problem right now, today. It's an accident waiting to happen, and as I told the prior council, a neighbor on Grant told me that his nephew had just such an accident trying to turn left out of that public lot. He couldn't see the oncoming traffic. So next week I'll talk about possible solutions. In the meantime, these are real problems that deserve your attention. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Jacqueline Moore. I live at 7005 Aspen Avenue in Ward 2. And I've been in my home for coming on 26 years. And I have watched Tacoma Junction being treated as the ugly stepchild for years. We seem to be the last ones to get real sidewalks. Then when we get a sidewalk, the sighting on it is wrong. See Boyd Avenue and the crossing at Aspen for a prime example of that. And we have a term in old-fashioned 17th century style sailing for what happens when you have a mess of lines on the deck of a ship. It's not an appropriate term to use right now, as are many terms in sailing, but you have that effect with the traffic there. Coming out of New Hampshire, coming up Carroll, you've got sections of streets blocked off. The Sligo Park Hills folks managed to block their neighborhood off, and so my neighborhood becomes the cut through, and it seems like having this development on steroids go in at the junction is just going to make it worse. And I am fine with having it retooled and made more user-friendly, but that doesn't seem to be the direction that you're taking. And I'm just here to go on record that I'm against it, and I will continue to show up. I will continue to write letters, whatever it takes to get you all to change your minds. And if you want to come and do a traffic ride with me one morning, let me know. It's not pretty.
Jeff Trunzo, Sherman Avenue, Ward 3. I support NDC Street Sense's efforts to create useful and attractive public space at Tacoma Junction and endorse their efforts to make the redevelopment as sustainable as possible. Indeed, replacing the asphalt parking lot with a useful and sustainable building, creating appealing public space out front, and providing more opportunities for Tacoma Park residents to consider walking rather than driving the short distances from their homes to Tacoma Junction will considerably help the area. It will also create a safe and attractive pedestrian connection between our neighborhoods and other destinations such as Old Town, Metro, and schools. In regard to sustainability, the core concepts are in the redevelopment proposals already: preserving the wooded slope and improving the plat materials and its attractiveness, LEED certification of the new building, a below-grade parking deck, separation of the pedestrians from the roadway with a well-designed and dense green buffer space, and a green roof to slow rainwater runoff. The new building should not be a surface parking lot or have access roads. I urge the city to encourage NDC Street Sense to amplify their plans with additional incremental sustainability improvements. For instance, an exploration of solar generation of electricity and different levels of LEED certification. I also encourage the city to consider the development of more design concepts for the wooded lot. For instance, can the invasive plants be removed and replaced with native plants that will support pollinators? Can a stormwater management feature be designed that would maximize the absorption of stormwater on site and possibly present a visually attractive cascade on the wooded slope? Those are just ideas. We need to emphasize the importance of the new tree canopy in the front of the building along the roadway and encourage the selection of suitable tree species that will provide both architectural beauty and durability, and eventually provide a substantial amount of shade over the public space. We could also consider including a few signs explaining the redeveloped area's new sustainability features. The area could be both beautiful and useful to educate school children and the public about the importance of environmentally sensitive building practices. I encourage your efforts to ensure that redeveloped Tacoma Junction provide usable public space and sets the standard for sustainability for new construction in Tacoma Park. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Roger Schlegel, 6512 Allegheny Avenue, Ward 3. I've already submitted comments that provide more detail about the comments that I'll share briefly right now. First, with respect to the proposed sidewalk in the public space zone, the Street Sense presenter on April 4th was misleading in his discussion. First, he showed the actual site plan, and then he switched to showing a trapezoidal-shaped plan for the public space zone. He went on at length to describe that zone, which he described as 45 by 60 feet, which would be 2,700 square feet. When I went back and looked at the actual site plan that's been submitted to you, that is 1,200 square feet of public space. So please check that. I call that to your attention because I think that 1,200 square feet would be far too small. Essentially, it would consist of a square area with two elongated extensions, and the square area is the same dimensions as the stage that you're sitting on. So that would be essentially the public space that we have, and it's far too small for any kind of public gatherings. Second, the Street Sense presenter glossed over the question of street trees. When you look at the cross-section, you can see that with the parking right under the sidewalk, there won't be any row of street trees that can grow. There's not going to be soil underneath most of the block. Third, the site plan presentation was misleading in the artist's renditions. In all the pictures, the sun is shining on the face of that building. That building is a north-facing building. The shadows of the pedestrians are actually facing south, too. I did some studies of the shadows that the building would project, and it's clear that for most of the day and for most of the year, that sidewalk in the public space would be in the dark, in the shade. Okay, that's not a pleasant place to gather. Please take a look at that. Also, with respect to the height of the proposed structure, it's not made clear that it's 40 feet high, 42 feet at the center of the facade, 45 feet high at the elevator tower. I can't find another example on the internet of a two-story building that's 40 feet high. Typically, that's a 3- or 4-story building. Please think about the mass. It's completely out of scale for the junction and the other 5 two-story buildings that we have there. With environmental impacts, think about how noise is going to echo off that 40-foot wall into the neighborhoods to the north. Think about noise coming out of the parking garage and the opening windows of the restaurant and the fitness center. And last, most important, when I was on the task force, I took a picture of a sign that said Woodland Conservation Area in those woods. That sign was removed in 2014, just at the time of this whole process starting. As far as I'm concerned, we still have a woodland conservation area, and I would like you to investigate who took down that sign and under what authority. Thank you. I say that because the development takes 7,000 feet out of the woodland conservation area. Thank you.
And this demonstration, steep slopes. Okay. Tina Schneider, Ward 6. I'm going to pick up where I left off last week and try to talk really quickly about 3 sustainability concerns. 1, I keep hearing about how the new building will provide stormwater management. Let's talk about that. Stormwater management is proposed in what is now a forested steep slope of over 25%. Visuals right there. 25%, so there are a few things wrong with that. Okay? A, under the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission Trees Technical Manual and under the environmental guidelines, priority forest protection areas include forested slopes over 25% or greater. Then they are put into a Category 1 forest conservation easement for permanent protection. B, DPS will not likely approve an outrageous siting of a bioretention in a forested steep slope. C, given that DPS will likely reject this, where will the untreated stormwater be treated? On site and not on the slope. Where will, I calculated that approximate treatment for the stormwater of a building of this size will be 4,855 cubic feet of treatment, which will be needed for full compliance. The proposed green roof, which is one of a few ways in which a building taking up a size this big can comply with the law, with the regulation, and that is not enough space. So I asked the council to mandate that this project treat all required stormwater runoff on site and that NDC does not ask for a waiver for treatment from DPS. So all stormwater management should be treated on site, and I want a commitment for that. 2, sustainability and smart growth communities include retaining access to healthy, local, affordable food. I am deeply disturbed by a conversation that I had with one of the people sitting up on the podium today who said, quote, if the co-op goes away, there are plenty of other places to buy food. Unquote. So how are we supposed to believe the words that that you say are genuine and that you truly are trying to protect the community co-op? 3, as mentioned last week, LEED Gold does not conform to the new IGC county standards for green buildings. They only require the minimum energy performance. So I ask that the council request greater energy efficiencies to optimize energy performance. And I also request that NDC resolve these issues to modify the plan right now, not after the council approves the plan. Because I know for a fact that when the plan is transferred over to county agencies, they will not repudiate the plan, but instead they will provide waivers and accept the minimum standards. So it is your job to change that.
Jordy Hannum, Ward 3, Sherman Avenue. I hadn't planned to speak, but I do just want to say that I wholeheartedly support the redevelopment. And just a couple things. I know a number of folks on the street and the community that I talk to do support it, and they have been here. I do think it's important to say the people in this room do not represent all of Tacoma Park. And if you just looked around, so the notion that all of Tacoma Park or 90% is certainly not the case. I know there are many, again, young families, others working who cannot be here, but certainly do support the redevelopment and would benefit in many ways from the redevelopment. I want to say one other thing just in terms of the council itself and the mayor and the willingness for the council and others to listen and compromise. I have actually been impressed over this project and even over the past few weeks, today and other times, about the number of opportunities, listening sessions that have been made available. I've been impressed by the compromises that have been made. NDC came with a proposal. It wasn't a home run. They made concessions to it. And I sometimes feel from those who are opposed that same willingness to compromise hasn't been there. And what I've often felt is there's just been a reflexive opposition to anything that's done. And I think a good example is I came to the site plan meeting, and there was someone who's actually an architect who was talking about that the project itself, it was very odd that there wasn't a setback and a third floor, and that a setback and a third floor would not be visible, but it would allow more space. It would actually benefit the places below it, and from an environmental perspective, that's much more beneficial. And there was a number of folks who were opposed to the project saying that's exactly right. There should be why isn't there a setback, and why isn't there more space? And I kind of head exploded a little bit that the same people who had been opposed to the project before were saying now, yes, it should have a setback, it should be larger. And I have that feeling sometimes that no matter what has been proposed, that there's opposition to that project in whatever may come forward. And so I do think there was a question put to the group of kind of, are you willing to listen? And I would say to everyone here, are you willing to compromise? I do think there can be a win-win here. I do think that this project, that the co-op would benefit from this. I do think the community would benefit, and I think there are a number of ways that we can come to a compromise, and I just hope that folks are willing to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments tonight? I wanted to check and see if Marcellus Costello is still here. Yes, I saw you had signed up on the public hearing for the traffic calming earlier on Fifth Avenue. Did you wish to speak to that? Sure. Okay. All right.
I'm Mercedes Costello. I'm at 6312 Westmoreland Avenue, and I just wanted to show my support for the traffic calming speed bumps and bump outs that we want to put in.
Okay, that's great. I thank you. And I'm sorry you missed the earlier hearing.
Oh, it was earlier. Oh, sorry. Yeah,
that's
there's
okay.
Just a lot of young families there, and so we need our traffic calming. All right.
No problem.
Thank you.
And I think someone else wanted to speak.
TJ Matthews, Lincoln Avenue, Ward 2. I'm going to talk about something that's a little bit different than maybe what we've already heard tonight. My questions are, can Tacoma Park keep its crunchy character? Are we still the People's Republic? The evidence is conflicted. Last week, Tacoma Park hosted the American Primitive Guitar Festival and Art Hop at the same time. Sure, many small cities have music and art, but woo, Tacoma Park does this stuff right, and it does a lot. It's really amazing, and it's crunchy too. I'm a demographer, so I looked up some statistics about Tacoma Park that not everybody necessarily knows about. In 2000, the median household income in Tacoma Park was $48,500. In 2016, that number had shot up by 62% to $78,500, an increase of $30,000, almost double. It's just incredible. That giant move up is much more a reflection of those who moved into Tacoma Park during that time period than any dramatic rise in the incomes of those who have been here in both time periods. Think about that a little bit. The fact is that wealthier people have moved here. In 2000, the median house or condo value was $190,000. In 2016, it blasted up by 176% to $525,000. The folks with more money moving in bought those more expensive homes. Some of them are new neighbors of mine. I've met them. They seem just fine. Turnover in Tacoma Park has changed our makeup and perhaps, although harder to measure, our attitude. The City Council gets to hear over and over, my name is X, I live in Ward Y, I've lived here pretty much forever. Yeah, I'm one of those, 19 years. Our votes, however, are exactly equal. I voted for a candidate to represent me in my ward. At first, I had picked someone else because of what I heard about the development. The mayor got my vote for the same reason. Your words impacted the way I voted. I wonder if members of the City Council are getting a feel for how its citizens would vote themselves on this plan. I think we're all curious what they are thinking. And last, I'm wondering if they vote to give the nod to this plan for this 7 acres, are they trying to tell me and my ilk, who could not afford to buy the homes we actually live in now, that we aren't wanted in Tacoma Park anymore? No one would ever admit it, but I'll be wondering it nonetheless. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to make a comment tonight? All right. Well, I thank you all for bringing your opinions, and I know that my colleagues and I will all be listening to what you say and considering that as we move forward. Next on our agenda is opportunity for council comments, and I would ask my colleagues to try to remain crunchy as you give these comments. Although I don't see many. Ms. Searcy.
Thank you. First, I just want to send my thoughts and prayers to the mayor and her family. I pray safe travels for her to Florida. I want to thank the New Hampshire Gardens Community Association. They held a neighborhood association meeting yesterday, and I had the opportunity to be a part of some of the discussions that they're having about the budget, as well as solicit thoughts regarding the junction development. So that was really helpful to hear. I want to give a special thanks to the Tacoma Foundation and the other organizers of the Love Tacoma event that was held last Saturday. Carolyn, Shauna, Howard, Rizzy, Jackie, Ben, Annie, Shawanda, my fellow council member, Cindy. It was a wonderful opportunity. There were so many great organizations that were able to connect with one another. And I heard we had about 30 some odd little ones running around and playing. So, I want to thank them all very much for all of their hard work in trying to connect residents in need to services that are provided. Also want to just announce that there will be a Purple Line Community Advisory Team meeting on May the 1st at 6:30. And for folks who are not familiar, this Community Advisory Team meeting is for University Boulevard. It will consist of the Tacoma Langley stop as well as the Riggs Road stop. The Community Advisory Team is an opportunity for different neighborhood representatives from various neighborhood organizations and different groups along that will be impacted by the Purple Line to have an opportunity to hear from the group in terms of plans for their particular Purple Line stations. There's also an opportunity for people in the general public to come out, hear about the plans, ask questions, and the like. So definitely want to make sure that people are aware that there will be a Community Advisory Team meeting on May the 1st. Also appreciate Kaylee coming out and had the opportunity last Thursday to participate in Tacoma and Langley Crossroads Development Authority's Executive Board meeting that happened last Thursday. And I appreciate these opportunities to speak with folks who are living some of the issues that we talk about on the council day to day, and to solicit feedback, for example, from the board on the personal property tax or the inventory tax that we'll be talking about tonight. So it was nice to have that opportunity to talk to small business owners about the various policies that we're discussing here in the city. And I think, checking my list, checking it twice, I'm done. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Nice work. I just want to mention two things. One, I do want to thank everybody for taking the time to come out tonight and give their views on the junction. It's very helpful to have that, people from all over the city, and I really appreciate it. There's been a lot of discussion in North Tacoma, and perhaps those who drive through or otherwise travel through North Tacoma to head in the Silver Spring direction have noticed, and I mentioned it previously, about the difficulty with the Pepco work that's taking place there. So there's going to be a public meeting that anybody can attend, which will include representatives of Pepco giving a presentation on the plan, and that includes what we can expect for the future. And I'm hoping there are some options within that we can talk about, and then an opportunity for members of the public to speak and offer their opinions and ask questions and so on. And that meeting will be on May 8th, which I'm just checking my calendar is a Tuesday, a couple of weeks from now, at 7:30 in the Azalea Room here in the building. And that room is also fitted up with the projection technology. So I think Pepco will be showing some images first that will help us to get a further understanding of it. So anyone is welcome. You don't have to be from North Tacoma or from Ward 1. You can even be from Silver Spring. But it's Tuesday, May 8th at 7:30 here in the Azalea Room. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Costa.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone who came out today to watch and listen to the council meeting or to comment. And I want to just remind the Ward 3 folks that I am planning 2 listening sessions, meetings with Ward 3 residents to talk about anything, but specifically related to the junction development. And those will be on Saturday, April 28th from 2 to 4 p.m. here in the Azalea Room, and on Thursday, May 3rd, from 7 to 9 p.m., also in the Azalea Room in the Community Center. So I hope to see some of you there, and I hope we'll have an opportunity to have more discussions and talk, kind of a back and forth exchange. I also want to report a little bit on the Council of Governments Transportation Planning Board meeting that I attended today. One thing that I think might be of interest to residents is an upcoming meeting on Thursday, April 26th from 7 to 9 p.m. at the Executive Office Building in Rockville. This is a public forum related to the Visualize 2045 plan, which is a long-range transportation plan that the Transportation Planning Board is working on for the entire metropolitan D.C. area, so Maryland, D.C., and Virginia. And this plan it has 2 different kind of focuses. One is a constrained element, and one is an unconstrained element that is more aspirational. So it's a chance for residents to come out and learn a little bit more about the plan and share the things that work for you for transportation as well as things that don't. And it focuses on driving as well as biking, walking, public transit, the whole range. So I encourage people to take a look. You can find out more information. I don't have their website right here on me, but if you look up Transportation Planning Board Visualize 2045, you can find out more about those forums. The other things that we talked about at the meeting today that I think is really important is Bike to Work Day. People might be interested in. Will be May 18th. And Tacoma Park is participating. There will be 2 pit stops here in the city for people who are biking. You can go and get a free T-shirt, get refreshments, talk with other people who are biking. One of those pit stops will be in Old Town, and one will be on Sligo Creek Parkway near New Hampshire Avenue. If you go to the website biketoworkmetrodc.org, you can register ahead of time and get more information and find out if there are other riders riding in your area. So I encourage you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Dabala.
Yeah, very, very quickly, I want to thank the city staff and also all of you council members for putting up with me remotely on Monday night. It was, I thought from my end, quite productive, and I appreciate the chance to be able to hook up. I had to go out of town unexpectedly, but I'm back. And I want to thank everybody out here and who's from Ward 2 for showing up and commenting. I do want to say I am also getting a lot of emails, and they represent a wide variety of views, and I'm trying as best as I can to address these questions as people have the concerns that people are raising to me. I have not got listening sessions scheduled for Ward 2, but I have been invited to, so far, 3 separate groups of residents who live on a block and want to talk. So other neighborhoods in Ward 2, if you want to do that, I'm open to it. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I appreciate it. First, I want to thank all residents for coming out. It's always nice to see the auditorium filled. I wish we had more residents who are tenants at these meetings, but it's always nice to see you. I would like to remind my colleagues tomorrow evening, the Montgomery County chapter of the Maryland Municipal League will have its monthly meeting. The town of Laytonsville will be hosting. You all should have received an email notification. It's going to be at the St. Paul United Methodist Church, and it starts at 6:30. Thank you.
Thank you. Now I'd like to move to the city manager. Do you have any comments for us tonight?
Yes, thanks. Just a few. One has to do with a dockless bike share update, and I know that that's been an area of interest for many people. City staff met yesterday with county officials that have been working on the evaluation of the dockless bike share pilot. Because the initial 6 months of the pilot spanned late fall and full winter, the county plans to conduct their formal evaluation after a couple months of warmer weather so they have better data about usage trends that are done during the warmer months. Nevertheless, I want to interrupt. I understand that one of the more popular biking routes was from Maple Avenue area to downtown Silver Spring. So there's a lot of use of the dockless bike shares in this area, and so it'll be very interesting to see when we have full data. The county is enlisting the services of an outside consultant to review and analyze the data, as well as complaints and feedback that came to the county's 311 system. Then draft a report with recommendations for what should be included in any agreements made when the pilot is completed. We've been told that we can expect to see the report in June or July. So it sounded like it was a productive meeting after a while of not hearing much. Wanted to just, yes.
Mind if I just asked a follow-up
Right ahead.
question on that? Thank you. So we mentioned this previously, but our initial understanding, or at least mine, had been that it would be about 6 months. So, and that 6 months is over. So they are talking about adding some additional time.
Mm-hmm.
That's because they don't think they have sufficient data because there was less riding in bad weather? Is that really what we're talking about?
Actually, perhaps the deputy city manager. I didn't attend the meeting, so perhaps you can.
So there are a couple of reasons that they noted. One is they said that the dates that they signed agreements with the company spanned a month or two. So some of the pilots, the 6 months of the pilots, end at different times with the bike share companies. I don't think that there had been a lot of consideration put into how they would evaluate the pilot at the end of this 6 month period. I think it was pretty much decided at the county level that they would extend it after the 6 months for the full year. That's why the language in the MOU states that the pilots would automatically be extended at the end of 6 months, and I think that that's really they were operating under the assumption that it would go for the full year.
And that is what we had agreed to as well, is that right?
We agreed to be a part of the MOUs that they have with the bike share companies, yes. But we thought that there would be an evaluation done at the end of 6 months, which is why we started asking. I was personally a gadfly, I think, beginning in February. And so the meeting that we had this week was the culmination of several emails and phone calls that I made.
Well, I appreciate that you made those calls. It's a little disappointing that the county took that long. So can you start gadflying again when we get to June so that it doesn't just become an endless delay?
You know I will. I was given a lot more confidence that they are taking the evaluation of the pilots seriously. They've engaged a firm already, Tool Engineering and Design, I believe they're called. And if we don't hear something back before mid-June, I'll certainly, and I'll be inquiring leading up to June
Okay,
as well.
thank you. Thanks.
Sure. That's fine. No, I do have to give some kudos to the deputy city manager for his persistence and his pressure from elected officials and a variety of other efforts to get some response. Just a quick announcement that the city's dog park will be closed on Monday and Tuesday for replacement of the gates. And the dog park will reopen on Wednesday at 8 a.m. The new gates will require poles, which will be set in concrete, and the concrete must be set before the gates can be used. So there will be 2 days of the dog park being closed. Wanted to mentioned in a number of places, we'll have the pop-up at the Tacoma Junction this Sunday from 11 to 2. It sounds actually very useful to be able to see where the building would be laid out, where the lay-by would be, where public space would be, and there will be even some ways to indicate height, some food on site to see kind of how it might be used. My understanding is even one element will show the height from Columbia Avenue, so you can see from the back of the site. So I think there's a lot of thought being put into what will this look like, so that we have real comments back and forth about what's positive and negative. We want to have that information. I did hear, unfortunately, and this is the way things go, that SHA will be trying to finally do its switch over the signals at the same time. So there will be traffic flaggers out there. So it'll be more realistic than even we planned. Then I also just wanted to note that on Monday I had presented comments on the budget that I'd been asked to put up on the website, and so those will be up tomorrow from the Monday meeting with a little bit more information. I know that there have been a lot of discussion about the proposal for positions and a tax increase, and so I addressed those in that statement, and that should be up tomorrow. That's all.
All right, I thank you. Were there any questions for the city manager? I wanted to check on the, you had several positions open, and I wanted to check on the police department to see, I take it from, we're looking for people that we're not fully staffed. Where do we stand right now with that?
Well, I don't know the exact number. We always are looking for police dispatchers and police officers. We're trying to fill them, but that's always an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I realize that. I know sometimes we've gotten exceptionally short, and I just want to make sure we're not in that position now.
I think we're getting a little tight, and I'll respond and send you the information about where we stand with the vacancies.
Thank you. That'll be helpful.
Sure.
Okay, we'll move on to our voting session then. Tonight we have the first reading ordinance exempting 100% of inventory from the business personal property tax. I understand that we have a new revised ordinance.
That's right. So it should be passed out, and I have a few extra copies if others are interested. I did give one to Laura Barkley while she was here, so she can see.
Thank you.
The proposal here. Get the right things?
Are we okay there?
Yeah, sure.
No side conversations? Yeah.
So this is the first reading ordinance of the proposal to eliminate 100% of the inventory portion of the personal property tax. We've had a number of discussions about that with the council, and have prepared at your direction, prepared an ordinance that would allow us to proceed notifying the State Department of Assessment and Taxation that we would no longer have the inventory portion assessed as part of the personal property tax. That's about 2/3 to 3/4 of the amount that we get from the personal property tax. This year, it's about $320,000 of the $420,000 total that we get in personal property tax. So the ordinance refers to the direction to do that. There was also a good amount of discussion about should there be a process of finding some way to recoup the foregone money, and so there had been some discussion back and forth on email. I really appreciate the attention by the various council members to do that, and I think we came up with the latest version, which I think is pretty close to where people are, but I'm happy to hear what any changes that you might have. The new version adds a whereas that says that the council priority to advance community development for an improved and equitable quality of life includes support for local businesses. And then there's two new kind of be it therefore ordained clauses. One is that by early January 2019, the council will specify a definition of commercial real property that may receive a different tax rate during the fiscal year 2020 budget process. And Section 3, that the council will consider how to address the funding gap due to the removal of the inventory portion of the personal property tax, including but not limited to assessing a commercial tax rate and to the impact current development projects may have on future tax revenue. So to clarify on this, there is time that's needed to identify the definition of a commercial real property tax so that the county can put that into its computer system. And it's so that would be a discussion that we would want to have as the council and with businesses to get that understanding. That needs to happen relatively soon. Whether or not you actually assess a different rate to them is part of the budget process for next year. So that's by early January 2019 is that definition so that it gets into the computer systems of the county. Then it's up to you during the budget process to determine the rate that you would want to assess for it, and if there's other things that you would want to take into consideration or not. So that's what these changes are to the proposed ordinance for your consideration.
Thank you. Would someone like to move this ordinance?
I would like to move it, but
Okay.
there may be discussion.
Well, I have discussion. Is that after we move it?
After we move it,
Okay.
yeah.
I'll wait.
Okay, so it's moved by Councilmember Dabala. Anyone second?
I'll second.
Okay, Councilmember Smith. Councilmember Smith. All right, now, are there any discussion? Mr. Kovar.
Thank you. Two areas that I wanted to ask about, and maybe Ms. Ludlow, you could respond. So on Section 2, I'll step back a minute and say I'm generally supportive of eliminating the inventory tax. In Section 2, in the therefore be it ordained sections, you did just speak about this, but I'm not sure I fully understand what it is that we would be specifying by early January of 2019.
Sure. So right now, if we just told the county we'd like to have a commercial property tax, real property tax, that their standard definition includes apartment buildings. And given that there is a different, you may want to have a different discussion because of the housing initiatives in the draft Housing and Economic Development Strategic Plan. It may be that you don't want to take kind of commercial businesses and the running of apartment buildings at the same level. And so that would be part of the discussion. If you want it all the same, it's easy for the county to do that. But if you want to specify that it's only certain kind of businesses meet the commercial property designation, you could look at size or some other kinds of things. I mean, there's a variety of options for that. That is something that you may wish to discuss.
So timing-wise, though, if we wanted to do that, the county would need to have at least the potential of what we wanted to do by that date in January?
Yeah, I mean, they haven't put a specified date, but we weren't able to do it this year because they needed more time.
But so now...
And I think that also it's important that you talk about it. So just making sure that we have time to talk.
So I had expressed reservations, which I still have, about whether in getting rid of this, it should be replaced simply by an increase in the commercial property tax, although I don't object to people raising that and discussing it. But does either Section 2 or Section 3 commit us to actually doing that, or is that just that that's on the menu of things that we would be able to consider.
It would be on the menu because the Section 2 is that you at least have a discussion about what makes up a commercial real property tax, what that category would be. Whether or not you do anything with it or how much money you try to recoup in any process would be part of the budget discussion.
Okay.
And you could have the commercial real property tax rate be exactly the same as the rest of the
But
real
you
property.
couldn't do that fully if you went this route unless you had done this earlier part. By
Correct.
Jan. Okay. And then the other question is in the Section 3 there, in the last part, where it says including but not limited to assessing the commercial tax rate. The including means to considering, not to actually imposing. Is that correct?
Yes, I think Councilmember Searcy suggested this, so.
Yeah, I think it provides us with the most amount of flexibility.
But the including is the considering. We're saying that's
Right.
one of the things we'll consider. That's not necessarily one of the things we will do at
Right,
this point.
right. Exactly. Okay. So my thought was we'll consider how to do it in an attempt to address some of the comments that were made by Councilmember Dabala. So we include, looking at the commercial rate, but it won't be limited to just that.
Okay.
Right. The
But
second,
it won't guarantee that we do it either.
That's right.
Exactly.
The second part of the comment that Councilmember Searcy noted was that there are a number of properties that will be coming on perhaps to the tax rolls, such as Washington Adventist Hospital, which could be a substantial amount and maybe something that changes how we look at some of the revenue that we need to recoup.
So that's the last question then. With that point, maybe you've answered it already, but how do you feel about the idea of us repealing something but with a year to figure it out? Are we putting ourselves in a little bit of a hole by doing that, given the challenges that we have in the budget that we're going to be taking up in the next 2 weeks?
My view is that there are real business benefits to the city for getting rid of the inventory portion of the personal property tax. I don't think it's a fair way of recouping money. I think there's enough logistical problems with the way it's implemented, as well as it only affects certain businesses and not other businesses. So I think that there's a lot of justification for removing that as a source of funds. I personally like to see money replacing it, but that's a discussion for the next year.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Searcy.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was second. Well, first I just want to say that I fully support the ordinance. I think if now when, is basically the situation as it pertains to the inventory portion. I think that this is just a baby step towards developing an overall strategy for how we're going to address some of the economic drivers that are going to impact the city. And so I definitely think it's important for us to show, particularly some of our small local businesses that may have high levels of inventory, that we are supporting them and we want them to stay here, especially given different things that may be happening, such as the Purple Line and things like that. I also think that Section 3, or at least my attempt, as explained earlier, was to provide us with a level of flexibility to kind of deal with some of the unknowns. Another elephant in the room is, what may happen with the junction and how that might actually impact our bottom line financially in the next fiscal year. So you have Washington Adventist, you have potentially the junction, and how do those potential dollars impact our bottom line, and does it actually result in us needing to recoup the funds? So I do like the idea of us showing a good faith message to businesses now that we are committed to addressing this challenge that has not only plagued them, but as it's impacted us as well. But also kind of taking the necessary steps afterwards to make sure that we're developing a full strategy for how to make sure that we're establishing a viable tax structure for businesses in the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Dabala.
Yeah, a lot of what Councilmember Searcy said, I won't repeat it, but I think I started the business with the date, and the reason is twofold. One is I was afraid if we just passed this without attaching some commitment to taking a look by a certain date, that it might just slip away with all the other business, and I didn't want that to happen. I also think it's only fair to the businesses in Tacoma Park that they have time to be part of talking about what would replace this if we decide that that's what we want to do. So that's why the date. That's why the date. So I'm good with this as it is.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. First, I want to go on the record and say that I do support moving forward with eliminating the inventory tax. It's kind of weird that we even have it. The county doesn't have it. So, it does make it difficult for businesses to pick Tacoma Park. But I also want to say I will not support if we have a tax just for commercial property owners, because that tax is just going to be pushed to the tenants. So I think we either are going to support small business or we're not. So thank you. I'm sorry?
All right. No, thank you.
That's it.
That was all. All right. Okay, I think we're ready to vote on this then. So we'll be voting on the ordinance exempting 100% of inventory from the business property, personal property tax. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right. Passes
It
unanimously.
will be back.
Thank you. All right, moving on to the next resolution ratifying the collective bargaining agreement between ASME, Council 67, Local 3399, and the City of Tacoma Park, Maryland. And
Thank you.
who's going to present that?
I can do it. Very pleased that this negotiations come to a close, and the ASME Council 67, Local 3399 have voted in favor of the contract and the wages for FY18 and FY19. And there's a number of small items that were identified in the cover page related to how leave is accrued, the clothing and boot allowance. We maintain our pay-for-performance system with a commitment to the evaluation process, and the wages that the salary scale increases by 2.1%, which is the ECI, for state and local government employees, which we look at every year, as well as salary steps for those who are rated as distinguished, an additional salary step for that. And there will still be a wage negotiation for FY 2020 because of the difficulty in predicting the economic situation for FY 2020. That's the same as we have with our Local 400 police union agreement. I urge you to support it, and we'll sign off on this.
Thank you. I will point out that the current agreement expired in June 30th of 2017, and I will encourage management and the union members to work harder to make sure that we don't have that kind of gap again in the future.
Yes.
Would someone like to move this resolution? Moved by Councilmember Smith. Second? Second. And Councilmember Searcy. All right, any discussion? Councilmember Kovar.
Just two quick questions. So there were various challenges around the negotiations, and we're providing, I just want to confirm, retroactive pay dating back to
Yes,
the period when
to July 1, 2017. The process when it came into play.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they have basically this fiscal year.
And there was some talk about the council having a future interaction with.
Right. I mean, I think there's a strong interest in having, when we're not in negotiations, having a good conversations among employees and council members and staff. So we'll be setting those things up.
Okay, I think that would be a great idea. So I would support
Yep.
that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you. I just want to thank staff for getting this deal done. It's been hanging over us for a long time now. The one thing that I would ask staff is if there is a problem in the future with another one of our agreements, that it's brought to the council sooner than later. Thank you.
Yep.
Councilmember Searcy.
I want to echo the thanks for staff work on this, and I also want to take an opportunity to thank all of the hard work of our union employees. The fact that people choose to work here is important, and I value the contribution of all of our city workers, and want it to be clearly stated that we want people to be paid for the contribution that they're making. And so I want to encourage the city staff and you, the city manager, to ensure that we are taking the necessary steps to implement an evaluation process for our union employees that is fair and clearly communicated and able to be substantiated, because I think that's going to be a critical step in ensuring that people are happy working here.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions on this resolution? If not, we'll take a vote on the resolution ratifying the collective bargaining agreement between the union and the city. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? All right, it carries unanimously. Thank you. And next we have the resolution providing for the appointments of the Noise Control Board. Anyone going to be presenting this?
You get to. That's not one I know anything about.
Right. So there are. So there was one member of the Noise Control Board whose term was expiring, and there was one applicant for a vacant position. And once, if council appoints this individual, and reappoints the current member, there will be 5 members of the Noise Control Board, and 2 vacancies remain. So we are certainly interested in having applicants for those positions.
Great. I know this is something that many community members are interested in, but we need to get some volunteers to actually participate. Okay, thank you. Any someone care to move this resolution? I heard a move from Councilmember Kostiak. Is it second?
Second.
There you go, Councilmember Searcy. We'll go ahead and take the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries unanimously. All right, we'll now move to our work session where we'll be discussing the Tacoma Junction site plan. And tonight we're going to be talking about the public space and sustainability features.
Yes, we are. Another part of our kind of 3-part approach to the different segments of reviewing the site plan. Tonight we will be looking at public space and sustainability features, and we'll have a presentation on that. I do want to call the council members' attention to, in your packet, another one of these little grids that we'll make sure you also have a copy electronically, that you can take your notes about how the site plan addresses a number of items, and then it's something that we can get some direction on for the future. I know we were going to look at kind of do a quick retake on what we passed last week. I think I'd like to pass on that. I got thrown off a little bit, I think, with some of the things that happened just before the meeting. So unless you'd like to do that, we can, but we may want to just do them both electronically and try to make sure that we've got all that information together. I've not seen anything for it. So for tonight, the items that will be addressed would be in smart growth, what's the land use and infrastructure, human scale mixed use centers, conservation of environmental and cultural resources, transit accessible, pedestrian oriented development patterns, processes and regulations that promote diversity and equity. For green space, it is noted that 48% of the lot remains undeveloped, but we'll have a lot of more information about that tonight. Environmental cleanup, what is the land that's underneath the asphalt, and what does that require for environmental redress? There's landscape features, street trees, planters, green slope, stormwater, green roof, use of the slope for stormwater management and issues that are related to that. The kind of green certification in various ways, LEED Gold certified or equivalent. Public space, activation, public seating, and just kind of looking at available green space or public space in the area as well. Those are some features. You may have others as well as we go through the process. And I'll turn it over, I think, to Colin. Welcome back.
Yes, and I don't know if you were here at the beginning of the meeting, but Mayor Stewart had a family emergency and wasn't able to make it.
Good evening. Thank you again. Colin Green from Street Sense, Director of Planning, representing NDC and the rest of our team this evening. The last time we did a work session, we spent a few minutes just kind of going over some of the more germane issues rather than having a really long show. So we wanted to point out a few of the features of the project that are most relevant to the topic of public space and sustainability, as well as perhaps go through. We've received some questions and are happy to kind of respond to those as we've had a little bit of time, at least to kind of bring folks up to speed with very specific questions. So I'll start with the more broad perspective with a series of slides. I know that we've also printed them out for you to look at. And I think we numbered the pages again, so it'll be easy to refer to those as we go back. Did we not? Maybe with
no, I don't think we
maybe
had
with the course of the evening we haven't. That's fine. We have them up on the screens. I can go back and forth for you as we go. So this evening we wanted to talk about the topics of open space and sustainability, and a few of the more specific elements are going to be kind of evident through the imagery. We've continued to show some of the character images of the project so that we can continue to understand how holistically this whole place works, and that with every issue of building design and placement comes an equal discussion about what that does to impact public space or impact the sustainability features of the project. And so again, kind of understanding how those components work together, how they can work in concert to deliver a place that really contributes to the neighborhood in a variety of ways, in commerce, in social space, as well as in being emblematic of Tacoma Park's future in terms of sustainability and responsible development. We also wanted to talk a little bit more specifically. We have this evening Steve Cook, our landscape architect from VICA, with us this evening. If there are detailed questions that he can help answer, we'd be happy to invite him up to deal with those questions. But we've been working in concert with a team that includes elements of civil engineering, building design and efficiency, planning, landscape architecture, et cetera. So it's important to note that all of those channels are important parties to the discussion about that public space and about that building efficiency. We wanted to kind of maybe show a little bit more to these roadway sections and public space sections that we had shown in the past. This is a section. Carroll Avenue is on the right-hand side, our project on the left. There was a lot of, there were questions previously before we had been able to really get a little bit more detailed in the design of the subgrade parking deck as to how that could actually work with some of the planting material that we were advocating for and trying to get so that we have a green element in our project. Wanted to point out that the front edge of the parking deck, which you see under the grade, does not extend either as far as our property line or the curb edge. So we do have room. It varies across the frontage of the project because the building is not necessarily parallel to the curb edge. So that number varies as we move back and forth. Where we have the most room is in the area where we are promoting the public space. And in that edge zone, we are looking to do the types of plantings that are more sort of understood as a street tree, something that grows to a height of over 20 feet, something that actually occupies the street edge. It is out toward the curb, as you can see in the diagram here. That would be a full mature tree. That's not as it gets planted. We'd have to work through the understanding of what caliper is required and how we can best place it so that it both provides shade, some structure to the streetscape, as well as stays out of the travel lanes. We're also showing just behind that an area of green that, as we've been working with Steve, we've been learning about the right kinds of plant materials to use that are tolerant of things like kids playing, tolerant of things like road salt or other devices that need to make sure that those plants have a high chance of survivability, are as maintenance low as possible, but still provide a backdrop and a warm feeling of something that is welcoming and can also provide an edge to the project. We are also looking, if you look at the top left of the picture above level 2, a green roof system which serves some purpose for the stormwater management of the project, as well as providing us with an opportunity to help cool the building and also as an amenity for tenants in the upper level of the building to provide some of that kind of green space. We can talk more about the specifics of that element in just a moment. But we also wanted to call attention to the area that we've just kind of colored a brown color just to represent that we do have room above the roof of the parking area and the ground. It varies in depth, and so we need to be very clear about what we can support in terms of growing material in that space. There are standards and requirements for plant depth, both here and at the county level, so we need to manage those as well. Wanted to also show a section through the area where the lay-by is occupying a part of our frontage. Again, that front wall of the garage is not to the property line. It's not in the way of the other activities that are happening that are very intensive with the traffic going over the top. But we do have room above that roof and the sidewalk area to support plant material. This is shown as an ornamental tree in that depth of soil, which could grow to about 12 or 15 feet and still provide a little bit of shade, a little bit of cover. Again, we're still working our way through the understanding of precision in terms of materials, in terms of spacing, and in terms of what we can do from a modulation standpoint. We don't want this to look like a monoculture stretching across the street. And these are not typically street trees along this part of the frontage. These are more ornamental. Again, we have the green roof and the representative soil depth. When we look at the back of the site, and I know the back of the site was a topic last time, more specifically toward what we can view and what we can see from the building placement perspective. If you look at the small diagram in the upper left, the little red bar shows where this section cut is taken from the back of our building, which is on the right hand of the screen, down to Columbia Avenue. And that grade varies a lot. It's quite steep. It does fall always toward Columbia Avenue, but it changes as you kind of curve around Columbia Avenue heading toward the south. The trees have never looked better than in this picture that are on the site. They are representative of the height of the canopy of the more mature trees. There are more trees than this on the site. There's also a good amount of undergrowth and some scrubby material between that canopy and the top layer of soil. One of the things that we wanted to point out here is that the two primary facilities that we are proposing from a stormwater management perspective are the green roof and this bioretention facility, which you can see at the back of the building. We haven't sized it 100% yet because we're still determining how much of the site needs to be captured in the stormwater. AMT, our civil engineer on the project, is working through those calculations. But typically a bioretention facility like this keeps the water nearest to the building and then at the bottom of it has a pipe that travels down toward the low end of the site. The water filters through that. There's plant material and other things inside that bioretention facility. It runs most of the length of the back of the building. And then there is an easement that's required from that point down to the outfall. that's usually about 10 or so feet wide. We can talk again more specifically about that. The picture in the top left is an example of a bioretention facility. Again, not necessarily representative of the size, but just of what you would see on sort of a daily basis. Again, this is pretty far up the hill and up against our parking deck, so you're not really going to see that picture. Yes, sir.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, can
I believe we had a question.
Oh, sure.
I'm the one that sent in these questions, I suspect. So,
Yes.
Not to take the time tonight, and understanding that you're still working through this with with AMT, but we have a public works director who has a lot of expertise in this area, and so I'm not trying to lock you into any particular size of anything, but
Sure.
could we get a sample set of calculations so that we could work it through her? She has a lot of experience in setting up just exactly this kind of thing, and I think it would really benefit the project to get her point of view, assuming it's okay with the city manager. Yeah, because some of the questions that were raised earlier may or may not be germane depending on what your specifics are. So yeah, that would
Okay.
be my request.
Okay.
Not right now.
Gotcha. Yep. Okay. The treed area, as we've kind of called it, is destined really to become a forest conservation easement, and the terminology is important because that answers some of the other questions that are kind of on the table. Some of that forest conservation comes in the form of restoration. There will be some amount of clearing and removing necessary to get the drainage, for instance, from the bioretention down. It's minimal. We also have to understand clearly the health of the plant material that's on the site now. And we are going to be responsible for replanting material at the rate that we're required to in terms of anything that we take out to replace. I'm sorry?
Forest conservation rules.
Under forest conservation rules. And the fact that it's an easement would mean that it is not an area that we could go in and create a park from, because it would have that designation placed over its entirety. And that's an important part of the back of the sites. It's kind of a receiving area for some of the green area that we need to accommodate. We also noted that the distance from the back of the building to Columbia Avenue varies a lot because the curving of the street. It's as close as about 20 feet up near the co-op. The co-op's building is about that distance, a little bit further from Columbia. But as we round the bend, we get closer to 200 feet away from the sidewalk. I also just wanted to point out, just very quickly in this section, the parking level where we're looking at the heights of the ventilation and or air and light portals that we can place along the back. And we are taking to heart how much distance we can provide to prevent light spill out from the cars in the garage. Did want to talk again about the primary elements of the site sustainability. The features that we're really trying to ensure are sort of leading the charge from the site perspective include things like the pedestrian-oriented development of a project like this, that we do have a lot of opportunity to really capitalize and leverage the multimodal access to the site. Bicycle parking, in addition to bike sharing. We understand the idea of the dockless bikes, et cetera, but people who want to arrive here on their own bicycles may have some of that site infrastructure available to them. Those are all components that are incorporated within the sustainability goals of the project, and we're looking not just to meet those standards, we're looking to make them useful, to make them not just emblematic, but real. We are continuing to look at the conservation of the wooded area, as I mentioned, and that bioretention facility. We are also pleased to announce that we have engaged Sustainable Building Partners as our sustainability experts on the project. This is simply a visual to look at how we're creating what we're calling our path to gold. We are required and going forward with LEED version 4 for core and shell for this project. That's the emblem that you see in the top left. SBP, Sustainable Building Partners, has already started to take a look at what we have so far today and is mapping out which of these criteria in terms of everything from sustainable sites to indoor environmental quality can be met, or are goals for our team to achieve going through the process of design development, construction documentation, et cetera. And we're very comfortable feeling like we can get to that standard and even exceed it. We're looking at opportunities to explore how this particular categorization of LEED Gold meets with the other standards that have been brought up in IGCC. And we're also looking for opportunities to explore some of those requirements as well. Some of the issues of energy options, ground source heat pumps, we're exploring radiant heating, we're exploring LED lighting to be typical across the board, low flow fixtures, green roofs, microbiome retention facilities, all have opportunities to play a part in a multitude of standards.
And
again,
this chart is part of the presentation. It's going to be put on the city website
Yes,
soon?
it is, and we're also having copies made too for us.
Okay. So we should expect that, or the public could expect to see that tomorrow,
Yes.
probably? Okay, thank you.
So again, I'll just note this is a draft. It's something that we're continuing to use. Typically, this gets done later in the process as a final card, but these are the kinds of things that we're looking at as we go through our process. I did want to talk more about the specifics of the streetscape and the landscape architecture by talking a little bit about some of the materiality that we've been exploring and some of those questions that have come up about scale and size and how a place like this could be used and fundamentally both exist as a part of the public realm and as a part that doesn't necessarily have to be engaged with the building. We have talked about elements of durability, elements of scale, elements of things that are serving more than one purpose, so that a bench doesn't always have to just be used as a bench if it can supply a place for kids to climb or people to hang out at. We're really looking for those places to be meaningful and engaging and useful. As we look at the space that is closest to our western side, again, we felt like if we provide you all with some of those dimensional qualities and then some images on the right-hand side of places that share some of the scale elements with the design on the left, you can start to see how useful a space like this can be. Most of the images on the right have come from a collection of imagery that includes everything from if you've heard of Parking Day across different cities where people sort of take over parallel parking spaces in the streetscape and develop small insertions into them to represent public space. The picture on the top right is 2 parking spaces but has this colorful bench. The picture on the bottom right still looks comfortable even though there are 8 or 10 people standing around. And that space in the bottom right would basically occupy only the small area in the top left in front of the stair tower. So we do feel like we have plenty of space to provide flexibility, to provide a number of opportunities for people to meet, socialize, hang out, that it's welcoming for people of all ages, and that we're really just getting started with the pure design of that space, but we know that it can include plant material, places for landing, as well as places that are away from the context of just tables and chairs for eating a meal from the restaurant next door. So with that, I wanted to, again, say that I certainly am available to answer more specific questions. Our landscape architect, Steve Cook, is here as well. So if there are questions that go more to the specifics of landscape architecture and design, he's more than willing to help answer those questions for you.
All right, I thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and see if we have any questions. Councilmember DeBala.
Here we go again. 20 questions. Now, seriously, this is something I'm curious about because I don't know exactly how this works with the moving target. So the county did just change their green building standards, and they've adopted the IGCC, as some people said earlier. And how will the team? Before I say that, so when the council first put in the development agreement, LEED Gold, that was a stretch, and it's no longer a stretch. And stretch is now LEED Platinum or IGCC, and so I'm not sure how we go about asking you to make the stretch that I think that the council envisioned in the first place.
Couple of things I want to address on that. Number one is that any of the divisions of the LEED requirements, Gold for instance, actually evolves as well over time. So there was a 2009 version of Gold. This is called version 4. Again, I think that it's important for us to make sure that we answer that question as deeply as we can. So I'm going to reach out to our partners to make sure that that's clarified. Yep. But I did want to say that my understanding, and when we have these kinds of standards in a variety of different disciplines across the board, and USGBC's is LEED, the IGCC is a different one. They evaluate things a little bit differently.
Well, it actually has a LEED option built into it. The county standard has a LEED option built into it now, but I think it's 4 or 4 plus or something.
My understanding from a phone call that we had today was that the IGCC is the LEED Silver path, and so Gold is above that. That's not to say that there are certain elements within each of those systems that are different and that there are higher hurdles to meet. But I also wanted to say that in the IGCC path, there are a few more elements that are more focused on energy performance.
Right.
And so we're tracking this project to make sure we understand LEED Gold primarily, version 4 core and shell, but also understanding that IGCC path. And the folks that we're working with are very well versed and will help us very much sort of meet or exceed those standards. When you see that draft report card, it's important to note where we're below certain things and where we can achieve them, not because we can't possibly get to them, but because we have to name what our systems might be, or we haven't designed that particular portion yet. So I hope that does a little bit, at least, to answer your question.
And again, we have someone on staff who might be able to help with this.
Right. Well, we certainly will be looking at this. I mean, I think what's in the development agreement is not the ceiling. You know, if there's a different standard that has to be met from development review process, you meet that. But that's, so I think it's, we will be going through each of these different steps to determine what's applicable.
Yeah, and I do want to point out, I want to reiterate what you said, which is that achieving one of these checklists is an evolving process depending on how the building changes. It's not like there's one answer right now. I understand that.
Correct.
Yeah, we've gone through that several times, and so we know how this. I mean, you have these lists, so you plan for them, and then as you go through, you keep checking them and double checking them, and maybe something comes up and you change it, and it's, and at the very end, you finally total up all the numbers and make sure that you get to above the amount. So it's an ongoing process, and you do have to start it at the beginning before you finish the planning, because you need to know that you can achieve it.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Kostiak?
Thank you. I hope my colleagues will indulge me. I have a pretty long list here. I might try to go through some of them and then circle back again.
That was just the first.
Do you want? Okay. I didn't think that was your whole list. First of all, I wanted to follow up on our discussions last week and find out what your plans are in terms of getting back to us with some answers about things. Like, I know we discussed the elevator, moving the elevator, and I asked some questions about noise and lights from Columbia Avenue. So I was just curious sort of what you're thinking in terms of responding to those questions and the questions that maybe we're raising today, and a timeline.
A great question. We took everything that we learned last week, we took back with us. We have to drive it through all of our different channels. One of the things that I understand is that the subject of things like the elevator, for instance, require the parties to sort of talk about what's necessary. Alex, my understanding is that there have been some meetings begun. So those are important between the parties to understand how that can be effectively placed into the project. Our goal, really from a broad perspective, is to make sure that we understand all of these elements, understand how they affect the project, and then return them to you. So we wanted to get through the work sessions because they're so specific in terms of their subject matter, and then very quickly return with an understanding of how all of those pieces can be combined and delivered back to you with yeses, nos, where they're placed, et cetera. It's a little bit of a different process than we're used to, and we know that we're driving toward the May 9th vote, but our expectation is that we can take these kinds of elements, incorporate them into our drawings, incorporate them into our package, and bring it back to you as here's what we've been able to accomplish, and here's how we're addressing some of those issues. We're constantly moving, so we're taking all of these notes, making sure if there's something that we can do right away or answer the question through documentation and narrative, we're trying to supply the staff and the city with all of those answers right away. As they affect building design, there are a lot of things that we have to go through to make sure that those are handled in the proper way. So we're trying to be as responsive as we can.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt your time. So who's maintaining the master list of the things that, like the after action items that we're asking for NDC to address?
Certainly staff will have the full list of those items. We're trying to keep track of that. But I would like to figure out how we're going to get that information back to you and say what's missing, what the timeline is of that, so that there's adequate time to review it. And because I don't think it's not going to be something that you see at the last minute. That doesn't make sense. So I'll need to be working with the various folks to find out what our timeline can work on that, so that we have an adequate time to discuss any changes that come back.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful because there are a number of things that are kind of coming via email or during the meetings that if we had a complete list.
It needs to be in a very standard list in place for you.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
So moving towards our topics tonight, related to public space, I think in general I'm pretty happy with what I see in terms of the public space here. I think that providing the space in the front of the building is really useful because it provides an opportunity for people who are just walking by to sort of see the space and to be drawn to it. And I also think that people want to gather where there's vibrancy and they see other people. So I think there are going to be people going to these businesses and then seeing those people and kind of being drawn to that space, I think, is a benefit of the public space design here. I did want to get a clarification on the size of the public zone. I've heard a couple of different numbers from different people during the public comment period, and I see these dimensions. Some of the other numbers I think that were thrown around in terms of public spaces, I've heard that the 27, I don't know if I've written these numbers down right, but do you have a sense of square footage of the public space or sort of what counts as public space as well? Because I feel like some of the things I've been hearing are including the forested area as public space or the green area as public space, and maybe that isn't an accurate representation.
Number one, we need to all sort of define what that is. I think that's been a part of the ongoing discussion has been to define, how we're measuring that. The space that you're looking at on the screen in front of the space is about 2,700 square feet. So that's where that number is coming from. There are plants in that. There are benches in that. There is curb edge, face of building. So until we get sort of closer to determining what we're calling public space, the public sidewalk in other locations is the public space. Where the public is welcome is another definition. So we just need to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. In that number, we haven't included any of the rear of the site or the green areas. We're also not including in that number any of the further spaces along Carroll Avenue. So if we wanted to talk about all of the space that we were developing as places where the public is welcome, it would be a much larger number than that. But I understand the concept of talking about this space in particular. So we're trying to give those dimensions. It's not necessarily a regular shape all the way through because of the modulation of the building and the edge of the curb, but that's the numbers that you're seeing on the screen here and that we have for you are sort of where we are today with the placement of the building, the depth of that setback, and the existing curb.
And I wouldn't expect you to necessarily know this, but I don't know if City Manager Ludlow knows the answer. Is how does that compare to the gazebo space? Do we have a sense of the square footage of that space?
I think it's a little bit bigger, but we had
2,400.
2,460, I guess, for the gazebo space.
Okay, thank you.
It will be, I think it also will be helpful to see when we do the pop-up. Of course, the one difficulty when you have a big space is sometimes it's hard to imagine, where things are, but I think we're going to try to lay it out so it helps tell the story a little bit.
Great. So in terms of the landscaping, what are you envisioning for that? I know you have some things here, some representations,
Sure.
But in terms of creating...
I'm actually going to invite Steve up to talk a little bit about that.
Great.
As we've worked kind of in concert, mostly from the sort of planning side and just sort of laying out a space. And then Steve Cook from VICA has worked with us on how to sort of understand, what kinds of things could that space actually include. So if you want to...
And I'm specifically interested in how you're thinking it could help to offset the space from the traffic as well and kind of protect people and create a barrier there.
So it is a very tough environment for plants. There's like Colin had mentioned earlier, de-icing chemicals, compaction, heat. So a lot of the plants that will generally spec are plants that are pretty resilient, and a lot of plants that are really resilient in an environment like this tend to be perennials. So, and I think too, when you have a mix of perennials, be it grasses or herbaceous plants, that mix and that look, that kind of wild look, works well with a hard urban space. It helps to soften it. It helps to create a lot of interest, not just in its texture, but in what happens throughout the season. So that's going to be the approach once we start to get into those details. And I think some of these images kind of portray that too. This middle left image shows grasses and how that contrasts with some of the harder straight edges, and that just creates a nice soft contrasting look. And also those plants, like I mentioned, are very, very resilient to what goes on in an urban environment like this.
Great. Thank you. And I would say I would like to see whether it's the landscaping and or the hardscaping, that there are ways, maybe in these top two pictures, I think in particular, do a good job of separating the space from the street and really protecting people, particularly young people who, are likely to run out into the street if they're just kind of hanging around there. And I think having that sort of barrier sets off the public space and also creates a sense of safety. So I think the more that could be incorporated, the better.
And we hint at that a little bit with the change in textures of the paving and the color. The seat walls help define a line of a pedestrian zone versus a gathering space or open space. So we'll select materials that help define that. The big open area, that textured area, could be exposed aggregate, while the other places could be a broom finish. And some of the other smaller spaces we may do something with a more granular look to it, like pavers, with a different color and different patterns. So all those different elements will help to add interest and texture, and also help identify what the spaces are for.
Great. So as a separate question, thank you very much, related to the landscaping. Separate question, is there planned seating along between the lay-by and the businesses there?
Yeah. Well, I think we have a plan of this, right? Yeah. Right there. So if you see that, the gray dashed seat benches, those that pattern that repeats itself. So on the lay-by side of that, you'll see planters with the ornamental trees that we saw in that one section. And so those planters will be occupied by, a small ornamental tree with some planting at the bottom level. Between there's room for cafe seating of different sizes and different arrangements, so that can be, changed or adapted based on, the retail use that ends up there. One of the things that Colin showed in one of the sections was how we have soil now at this edge. Well, it won't just be where the planter is, but that soil, we call it an extended soil panel, will actually run the length of that space. So we'll have pavement suspended over a soil medium that's going to allow the roots to expand. But we're going to try to get as much soil volume for those roots as we can. We tried to get 800 or 900 cubic feet for a shade tree, and we can get away with less for a smaller scale ornamental tree. And we may need to, in that area between the lay-by and the pedestrian space, raise the edge of the planters just a little bit to provide a little more depth. And that too will help break up the ground plane visually as well.
Good, thank you.
Sure.
So I just wanted to raise probably more for Colin than for you, although I'm also curious if there are other situations you've worked in. I know one of the things that I've heard from residents is concerns that this won't be an inviting place because of the lay-by and having trucks nearby. Are there ways that you envision, whether it's through the landscaping or design or other things, creating that as a more inviting space or a more comfortable space? And are there examples that you have seen in other places where this is done?
Sure, and I'll go through this in a couple of different ways. The first is from a diagrammatic standpoint. I just wanted to return to the section at that point where you see the two folks sitting at a table, behind them a barrier that protects them from any of the activity that's happening along the lay-by. And in this particular diagram, just the image of that sort of ornamental tree. If we move forward to some of the images that we used in the precedents, the picture as Steve pointed out, in the middle on the left-hand side, there are ways that when those little spaces become a little bit more room-like, whether it's through benches, a combination of plant material, and then the backing of whether it's bollards or some other more fixed piece that's a planter, you can get quite a bit of protection, sound, sight, et cetera, from the opposite side. And so there are some of the elements that you're seeing in these different images that could easily be used to help mitigate some of that real sort of nearness to the lay-by. It's also important to point out that we're working on how those, when the lay-by gets used, by whom, how often, how it's managed, and when stores are open, et cetera. So we have to look at it from the direction of not just the design elements, but how we actually operate it and how it gets managed. Those places exist. It's a vibrant and urban condition, but absolutely we have a lot of tools to help mitigate that and make it an inviting space. And it's part of the reason why the public space is really at the end rather than being located somewhere else along that lay-by, is that it's out of the way of that element.
And speaking of the lay-by, as you were talking about some of the uses where parking spaces had been converted into public spaces for a period of time, we talked a little bit about parklets, which is something I learned about when we had our discussion previously about allowing sidewalk cafes in the city. And I wondered whether there might be some opportunities, maybe on more special occasions, depending on the use of the lay-by, where that space could have a temporary parklet put into part of it to kind of make it a space where people could use it.
I think we'd have to explore that. Our hope is that in a place like this, that we wouldn't need the parklets because we've got the spaces to do the kinds of things that those tend to do in places where there is no sort of public space or real sort of seating areas. On the other hand, I think that those are always sort of great opportunities to think about how space can get used. And so we take a lot of cues from where those places have been successful and try to incorporate them in a more permanent way along the streetscape and make them useful all the time. So it's it's definitely an idea. We'd have to explore a lot more of it based on the functional use of that space. It's almost pure function. And so that's why we're spending so much time trying to make sure that all of the different channels that feed into it are cared for and intuitive and handled the right way.
I won't ask too many more right now. I can circle back if I have more, but I did want to just address a couple of issues related to the back of the property and the wooded area. What is your sense, and I apologize if you covered this before, I was distracted by the strange things falling behind us during your presentation. But what are you thinking in terms of having to remove trees from that location? I'm just thinking, even if there are trees planted in their place, that might affect the view from Columbia.
I don't think I have an expanded view of this, but I'll address that in a couple of different ways. So right now, we know that we will probably be disturbing trees at the back of our building, where we're beyond the location of the existing parking surface. We also know that at the point where we have our stormwater management facility at the back of the site, that we would probably need to address about a 10-foot wide swath from the bottom of the site at Columbia toward the outfall of that facility. Right now, as we look at our natural resource inventory, we've located some of the larger trees that are between that spot and up. There's at least one right there that would be in the way of a direct line. So we actually are trying to make sure that we're minimizing that impact on the existing trees. At the same time, and Steve can certainly speak to this, it's important for us to understand the health of the existing material that's out there now. And so while there may be some trees removed through the act of construction and building our stormwater facility, there may also be reasons to selectively prune and make the site healthier. We're also looking at the requirements from the forest conservation side that'll dictate how much we need to replace in terms of material. The square footages are sort of moving based on what our facility size is going to be and how much we would have to replace. But it's very difficult to say it'll be 3 or 4 trees or there'll be these ones specifically. But we kind of know where those trees will be most impacted by what we're planning today, and then continue to discover what we're going to have to replace, repair, and or make more healthy through the process.
And what are you thinking in terms of the level of cleanup back there and sort of final product, what that would look like?
So we definitely think that the forest conservation approval would probably require the removal of any invasive species. I know that was a subject that was brought up today, and that gets defined through that process. You know what it is that we'll have to remove and be responsible for. So again, it's something that we have to explore through the process. If you look out there today, you can see a lot of material that is just really thick. There are invasive species on the property, and getting those cleaned up and stabilizing that slope are some of the most important things that we need to do to the back of the site, and then turn it over basically as a forest conservation easement. It has to be healthy in that regard.
So I'm not advocating for this, but I'm just curious, it seems like the forest conservation easement places certain restrictions that don't allow for other public uses. And I'm just curious what the advantage of having the forest conservation easement is. I mean, I obviously understand that there are environmental benefits to that, but if there were a way to have environmental benefits because it were treated in a good way, without that specific designation, while allowing for some more flexibility, is that something that is a possibility, or does that impact the LEED Gold certification? What are sort of the parameters of that?
And I'll ask Steve to join me as well. But primarily, it's an environmental concern, right? That the restoration of this helps us make sure that we maintain a healthy amount of tree cover, that we're not stabilizing it, that the function of calling it a forest conservation easement means like you said, that there aren't other public facilities located within it. And I also just wanted to mention that really from the beginning, we started to explore what we could do with the back of the site, and I think that we've continuously sort of suggested that if there were things we wanted to do with that site, they would be more along the lines of education. They would be more along the lines of making sure that there is a green resource in the back of the slot. And for purposes of things like safety and lighting and everything else, ADA aside, it's really not a place we want to bring people to. It's the back of the building. And while there may be a deficit in Tacoma Park for quality open space, I think this is one that is more of a naturalistic open space. But if you want to talk more about the specifics of what's allowed,
and some of the overall benefits, driven by the forest conservation law are not only preservation of habitat, but actually like Colin mentioned, improvement of the health of an existing habitat, and that easement helps do that. And through the removal of some of the invasive plants, part of that long-term maintenance plan, I think it's a 5-year plan that has to be done by the owner to manage the forest after that point. So as the invasive plants are removed, understory plants are put back in place to help stabilize that environment to keep the invasives from coming back. So it's a long-term plan. And the great thing about the forest conservation law, especially in an area like this where we can create a nice reserve pocket that's going to mature and grow into a forest again one day, is some of the other benefits from that, biophilic benefits of users of the building being able to look out and see trees. There's so much data out there that talks about the health benefits of just seeing trees outdoors, and that will not only benefit the tenants of the space, but also the people in the neighborhood around it. And in terms of LEED, I think we've got a great space. One of the credits in the sustainable sites section of LEED is protect and restore habitat. So, our own local laws almost make that a no-brainer for us to achieve. And so that's, does that answer?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And I just have one more question, and I promise I will turn it over to others. So thinking regarding both the environmental impacts and the impacts on the people living nearby, one thing I would really encourage you to think about, particularly on the back of the building, but also on the front, is the lighting. And I know you mentioned the LEDs. One of the things that I have learned over the past couple of years in talking about some issues in the city is that it seems a lot of times LED lights are end up being a lot brighter than other lights if they're not purchased with a lot of care. And so as you're going through this process, I would really encourage you to think about the wattage, or not the wattage, but the brightness of those lights, as well as the color of the lights and the temperature, and to err on the side of something that is warmer temperature, 3,000 Kelvin and below, rather than a whiter temperature, because I think that would create a space in the forest conservation easement that is more inviting to wildlife as well as to the people who live nearby.
Great.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, thank you. And Councilmember Smith?
Oh, thank you. I will be quick. First question regarding the green space on the roof. Is it available for residents to rent that space, or is it just for the tenants?
Currently shown just for tenants.
Okay. You guys will, I presume, have on-site property management at the building?
Yes. I wanted to check with the owner.
Okay. So this has to do with the dockless bikes. A lot of people are just putting them anywhere. Will the property managers take responsibility of trying to make sure that they do not get in the way of pedestrians and people using the space?
I think that is a very good question. It's a very live question that people are wrestling with. My own neighborhood is wrestling with the same thing. People tend to just leave these kinds of bicycles. We'd want to work with the city to understand what happens there. One of the things we are promoting, and we can't be exhaustive about it, but we can provide things like bike racks that are away from the element of the shared bike that has the docks. And I think that providing maybe places where it's convenient to put those things instead of sort of leaning up against a random tree or in the walking space are becoming noticeable, and they're happening right now. So I think that's a collective answer for all of us to be thinking of is where do those things sort of go in the nature of the public street, and so we'd want to work as a group to find out sort of who's responsible for those. How do we work with those organizations that are providing them to understand where they should end up? I don't have a clear answer today on that one.
But you're thinking about it. That's what's important. The renderings look great. Regarding the front of the building where you have, this one right here. Did you guys do a lighting analysis to see, if there are going to be a lot of shadows in front of the building? One resident mentioned because of the way the building is facing that we're not going to get as much sunlight as the beautiful renderings indicate. Have you guys done that analysis, and can you share anything with us?
No. With regard to the sun shading, we've also been asked the question about how the tower may affect the neighboring property and the solar panels that are on the roof of that. So we need to do a little bit more work to understand how all of that works together. The canopy itself was not really intended to be as useful for sun shading as it was for that datum line and to keep some of the weather off as some of these storefronts are operable, rain in particular. But we do still think that there's an important element of verticality and horizontality that happen at different levels to make this an inviting streetscape. That things are happening at 17 inches off the ground, which is a bench, up to and including 18 feet overhead. And that some of those elements can do a couple of different things for us very well. And so it's definitely something that we need to take into consideration as we also go through the LEED process to understand how we're being affected by solar impacts, where it's going to be inviting to sit outside, and when and what times of year. So we're going to be working with Steve as well in terms of plant growth, how much light they get cycle through the year and the seasons. So it's something that's still in progress.
Yeah, we'll do a shading study when we model this three-dimensionally, more specifically from my perspective, to get the planting design right.
Okay, good. And then, finally, I think I can speak for the council and say that trying to get people out of cars is important to all of us. Have you guys thought about any type of shuttle services for people at the metro to the site? And maybe if your tenants are having an event, you could promote something like that.
We haven't thought about it in the detail. We have talked about those kinds of things to make sure that we're as front and center as we can be. We also think that as a part of this neighborhood, this is potentially a catalyzer, and that there could be other benefits to other tenants in the neighborhood, to other activities in the neighborhood, and we really think that ideas like that are important to consider because we're not just bringing people to a storefront. We're bringing people to a place where they can hang out, potentially spend the day, work here. There's a whole second floor of space that's not about retail. And so those are important. The idea of people coming to this site by things other than personal vehicles is important, compelling, and it's really driving a lot of the issues on the project.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'd like to just take a minute for a little follow-up on Councilmember Smith's earlier question regarding the use of the rooftop. And just remind my colleagues that the green roof was chosen over public space use because of noise concerns from the neighborhood and also for the environmental benefits of the green roof. All right, Councilmember Kovar.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. I'm using the resolution that we passed in October sort of as my guide for where we are. I realize that three of us weren't here at the time, but There are areas which I mentioned last week that I still think, from my perspective, aren't all the way there, which includes public space, which includes getting a better understanding for how the recycling and trash removal and delivery aspect could work, and then also the elevators. I think we at least need a second elevator, or if there's going to be a single elevator, have it moved over. But I did have some more specific questions, and I'll turn back to the public space in a moment. One of the questions I had was height, and I know you've talked about wanting to match the first floor to the height of the co-op, as I understand it, and that was where you sort of got the idea for the 18-foot or 20-foot height. Am I right about that?
The 18-foot clear height was really something that was born out of what we've found to be a very flexible ground floor clear space height for retail use. As it turns out, the building that the co-op occupies and our canopy are essentially in line at about 20 feet. Mm-hmm. And as we were developing the facade of the building, it became a nice sort of element to tie the height lines across between the co-op building and the new building at the junction.
So the roof of the co-op building is around that 20 feet, would you say? The
Correct.
Interior, I assume.
The top of the parapet,
right.
I think.
So the interior of the space, when you go in there, it's only part of that because you have, between the ceiling and the roof, there's some space there.
Correct.
Right. So, I mean, I was in one of the places along in Old Town on Laurel Avenue, one of the coffee spots there yesterday, and it's tall inside, and it's about 12 feet. So, I mean, for modest-sized places, 18 or so feet seems really pretty high. I mean, what would be something else we'd be familiar with that would look like that? Because these are not really, these are kind of narrow spaces, not like a huge restaurant down on 14th Street or something like that. So I was just struck, because I stood on the wall, I don't know, around 6 feet, and there could have been room for one more Peter, and I would have hit the top of it. It's tall. I mean, it's huge.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine a third one of me standing up there in a narrow thing, to be honest, and for a variety of reasons. But.
Sure. We've done a lot of research
Right.
in terms of understanding how we can be as flexible as possible to attract a variety of tenants. There are a couple of things at play. Number one is we can get more light from the front of the building into the depth of the building if we have more height, because we can do more glass above a traditional storefront,
Right.
which might be at 12 feet.
Right.
That brightness, that light really helps make the place more inviting. That 18 feet is a max. There are some of these spaces that are going to drop that ceiling to 16 feet or use something inside that brings it down to 14 feet.
Mm-hmm.
There are a variety of older buildings that, because of the construction types, only went to 12 because that's what they could support, where they could place a floor. Mm-hmm. We want to provide the opportunity for interesting lighting, let the tenants really understand how they can use that space. In a lot of the buildings that are along 14th Street, for instance, whether old or new, those spaces, if you see a storefront and then another transom above it,
Mm-hmm.
those are the types of spaces that are approaching that 18 feet
Mm-hmm.
or even higher
Mm-hmm.
in some of those cases. And that was, in the old days, primarily to get the light toward the back of the space.
So is that type of question, and I've had a few inquiries about this, and our staff has responded as well, but is something a height or the look of the facade and the way it lines up with the co-op structure and so on, to what extent is that something that you're already interacting with at some level with the Historic Preservation Commission, for example? Because I assume they'll have a lot to say about that, right?
We've met with them informally once. They gave us an opportunity to talk about where we are with the process. That was a couple of weeks ago. We have another meeting set up to just talk with them. We want to know what their ideas are. They are part of the process moving forward. But it's our hope that we can make sure that we're meeting all of their designated criteria about scale and massing. But we also know that this needs to be a building that fundamentally works in a modern and in a current way, so that a tenant, for instance, could find themselves in this space and not be cramped by the low ceiling. That we could attract the types of clients that could really appreciate the ability to have their brand and their sort of image.
But could, for
reflected.
example, historic preservation say, well, you can't have that cutout setback there because we want the whole facade to go along? Or could they say, sorry guys, I don't know, 14 feet's the maximum height we'd approve, and would you still be able to work with that? Is that even conceivable that could be the feedback from them?
I think knowing what their purview is and how they interact with the approvals process is the question.
Yeah.
My understanding of their criteria has to do with massing, with placement, with all of those elements, but none of them that I have seen so far are fixed in terms of this is a rigid limit. I think that it's important to be as tuned to the users of the building as it is to the people outside the building. And so,
but if they end up saying you got to cut it back a few feet, how big a deal would that?
I think we would absolutely push back.
Okay.
I think we would say that in our experience, the size and shape of those spaces for those tenants is a vital part of whether we can get leases signed and whether they can operate a thriving business.
Okay. Just a couple of other things. Just following up on the questions about the roof and the green space and so on, and I think it was Councilmember Smith who asked that was just for the tenants, and I believe when you and I spoke, or others that I spoke with indicated that you can't really have the public having access to that, even if it was in a controlled way for certain special events, because once you have that space, then you need to have bathrooms and so on up there. Is that, do you need more than that, or what is it that you really need?
No, the limiting fact, if you're looking at the screen, the
right.
blue area is 750 square feet.
Right.
That's really the limiting element for what we have proposed here. It means that space, sorry, page 7, if you
yeah, I think we have it.
Thing. Beyond that size of square footage, you would need a second way off the building.
Right.
So we would have to bring another staircase up to the level.
But say, for example, we talked about it a lot, who knows where it's going to end up. Say you did have a second elevator, so you had that. Is that sufficient to then say, okay, under a certain, we'll expand the blue space then a little bit, and we'll under controlled circumstances, when there's a special reception for someone's retirement or for whatever reason, you could have access up there.
So let me answer it this way. Right now, the control for who can get up to that blue space would be controlled by elevator passes, mechanical systems. I suppose that means that it doesn't mean that someone from the public couldn't be invited up there for a special event, et cetera. The purpose of it for us, for now, is to amenitize the second floor space. And then further to that point, I think where we were talking about having a second elevator, it's not a requirement that both elevators would need to run all the way up and down the buildings. And so there's an option that if we needed more space to get off the building, the only thing we need to provide is another staircase that goes down.
But if you had two ways up, there is nothing stopping you from making that blue space a little bigger if you chose to?
I'd have to check on what those what number that would rise to and what other facilities you would need to have. So, but it's a good question.
And one other point now. So on page, I think it's page 9 of the current presentation. Yeah. So I'm not sure if I can explain this just by describing it, but if you go to where the front of the co-op building is, and the little indentation there where the where the corridor goes down. And then you slide over past that first red retail space until you get to it right there, right? So from that whole spot, from the front of the co-op to there, it's actually not in a line with the front facade of the co-op. It's set back, and it only gets back up to the front facade of the co-op with the 3 sort of narrower places in the middle, the retail places in the middle, right? So it just sort of strikes me, looking at it, if you took the front of that corridor, which is set back a little bit, right about there from the co-op, and just brought that straight across as opposed to coming out, you would still have the same facade-looking effect. Yeah, you'd carve out some of your square foot for real estate, but you would actually just create a wider space all the way along the front there. And then if that's sort of just met up with where the indentation is that you currently have, that indentation could go back a little bit, and then you start to get some significant public space with, maybe losing 5% of your overall square footage. So what would be wrong with something like that?
So one of the things that we were attempting to do, and I apologize, I don't have a straight-on elevation view today, but the space where you were talking is from the left-hand side of the image on the screen.
Right.
That short piece that's colored in sort of the red brick is the piece that you were describing as being set back.
Right.
Because that's an entry into either the space at the back through the corridor or upstairs or downstairs into the parking garage, that was seen as a little bit of a subordinate space that we could pull back and then have less volume right on the street. So the yellow part of the building is actually in line with the co-op. It was just the angle that you saw in the previous slide is really just the storefront under that cafe space that angles back. And again, we had a few images of storefronts in one of the previous presentations where we talked about the ability for the storefront itself, that assembly, to make different shapes to angle back to provide more.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying is, I'll show you my little dotted line later, but you could have it set back, but because there's a break there, it went across. It would still all look like it was the same facade, right? Except you just have more space there.
So you're describing taking the yellow building and sliding it back 5 feet.
Well, part of it maybe 1 foot, another part of it maybe 5 feet. I mean, it just seems like that bulging out there doesn't really serve a lot of purpose other than just to make the public passageway there more narrow. And I mean, it serves the purpose of giving more square footage, I suppose, to the retail space, which I understand is not without significance. But I'm just not sure I see why it needs to pinch up like that when it could be set back, and the effect would be the same facade from across the street. You wouldn't be able to tell that. I'm not sure if I'm getting it across.
So we invite you to the pop-up, and also to consider this streetscape in concert with some of the existing streetscapes. For instance, on northbound Carroll, as you turn the corner, where the distance from the storefront and the edge of the plantings and the curb could be compared to this space to see if that's too pinched. Because I think that it's an important element to see in that sort of three-dimensional.
All right. Well, I don't want to continue with the debate now. I'll show you a hand drawing later of it. I think I'll let other people ask questions now.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember. I'm not willing to drop it, though, as quickly as he is. I think the question is, for that section, if everything couldn't be dropped back 5 feet, giving more space for diners along the front there, and keeping the same, drop back on the little section next to the co-op, and keeping the same facade all the way across. But dropping that, as you described it, the yellow and the red sections back 5 feet.
There is an amount of diminishing returns to the proximity of that sidewalk zone and the storefronts. We're right now at 32 feet on this drawing from the lay-by lane to the front of a store, which is much deeper than anything else really in Tacoma Park on its more regularized retail spaces. It absolutely is. And I think that the pedestrian through zone being 8 feet, we've proven out to be a very comfortable walking space, free and clear of anything else. It works well not just for the person that is walking down the street, but also the other end user, which is the person in the space that thrives on that proximity to the public space. So, I think that we were looking very hard at understanding how we balance between being close to the street and being too far back, and how we can actually modulate this facade that does a lot of things along its length from the co-op to the Healy building. So we're at a point where we really like the idea of aligning our front wall of the bulk of the building with the co-op, and everything else that's not in line with that steps back from it. And it happens in very particular places.
All right. I thank you for waking me up again, and we'll now turn it back over to Councilmember Dabala.
I'm also thinking about a comment that the mayor made last week about making the public the setback area. You can't make it deeper, but can you make it wider? And there's not an answer right now, probably, but just reminding you that that was something that got another variation on getting a little more space out of the front there.
And sorry, just to comment on that, the elements that are driving whether or not that could widen have pretty much have to do with the length of that lay-by lane, which is getting mandated by that large truck, as well as multiple vehicles, and its relationship with the traffic movements that happen through there. Hopefully, as we continue to look at the traffic elements and the consultant for the city and the consultant for NDC and team come closer to sort of understanding what all of the possibilities are, that's when and how we can sort of explore how that works.
Okay. I wanted to go back a minute to the roof and ask if there's some possibility, just to suggest a possibility that some controlled access on the green roof for some kind of community gardening be considered as a way to get some public use out of it, while still keeping with the notion of it being a green space as opposed to a patio for parties. So you might just think about that. There's a couple groups in town. There's ways to do that. I think that might be manageable, especially if you have somebody on site. That's one thought. I had a bunch of questions about operational issues, but it sounds like you may have started talking with the co-op about them already, and so rather than get into that tonight, maybe I'll just send a list and you can think about it. And I also had some questions about construction impacts and how you plan to mitigate for them, particularly environmentally, particularly looking at that back slope. And I want to ask, if I haven't already, for a slope map without the building on it, so that we can see how much, if at all, the building is coming out onto the slope as opposed to the flat area. It's not obvious from
Gotcha.
I think I asked for this last week, but I don't remember if I ever actually wrote it down. So just double check it.
It's on our list.
Yeah. Okay, Thank you. Because that goes to the point somebody made earlier about exactly where's the bioretention and so forth.
I will just briefly respond to the construction impact element with just a little bit of knowledge that we've gained, which is that there is a lead credit criteria for erosion and sedimentation control measures.
There is indeed.
Runoff control. So a lot of those elements are in the wheelhouse of both our sustainability consultant and our construction team to figure out how those things would be impacted, where they would come from, in which direction, and more specific to the site. But that absolutely is something that we are continuing to explore and need to in order to get the credits.
Right, and then the other aspect to that is operationally for the small businesses in the area. But again, that might be something that doesn't fit with the topic for tonight, but I think we really need to talk about it. It's that funny, huh?
No.
Or was it the green gardening? I'm joking around. That's it for me for now, I think.
Thank you. Councilmember Searcy, you had something else?
I did. Everybody's still awake? What? It's awesome. So, couple quick things. I was perhaps a little distracted during the. There were some strange things. There was some weird stuff happening. When you're talking about the LEED process and the fact that understanding it's somewhat of a fluid process, and understanding that at the time in which our agreement was placed, we were encouraging folks, you all to strive for gold. I want to encourage you all to definitely consider LEED gold as the floor, and to do what we can to go to exceed that. And I understand, at a minimum, folks want to make sure that they're meeting the terms of the original agreement. But I definitely highly want to encourage, very much so, that you consider that to be the floor. Another point, so one point that was made earlier was, the width of the sidewalk, and how it compares to at its narrowest point, and how it compares to other sidewalks in the city. I'm going to be frank; those sidewalks are narrow. If you have two people walking side by side with umbrellas, someone's getting hit in the eye. So I would definitely not, again, talking about ceilings versus floors. Making sure that we're not using the current width of sidewalks in Tacoma Junction as the floor, because being frank, it's not quite adequate if you are walking past large groups of people on those sidewalks in some places. So definitely want to make sure that you all are considering from the perspective of not just access or visibility of the businesses on that stretch to the street, but also the function of the width of the sidewalk for that particular segment.
We are, and that reference to checking on other ones was for comparison.
Okay,
I think that we're looking to exceed what has been done, and that's not just a measurement. That's in the character, that's in the health of the streetscape, that's in the activity, that's in the ability to feel comfortable and safe. So in all of those measures, we're looking to not just sort of stay the course of whatever we find on neighboring streets. It's vital to us, both to the user on the sidewalk and to the people inside the building, to make this something that isn't just memorable or pretty, but actually functions in every possible way that it can be. Again, saying that there are places where we can also get excessive. And so we just want to make sure we're hitting the right balance. We want it to be comfortable, we want it to be of Tacoma Park, and we want it to be a place that at the end of the day we all say, yep, we got it right.
Awesome. And I just want to echo how much I really like this design.
Thank you.
I do. I like it. One last point, and again, it's just stressing a point that was made by Councilwoman Dabala about the impacts of construction on the businesses that are already in the junction. And I understand that the focus of this discussion is about sustainability, the environmental aspects, but there are also implications in terms of business access, visibility, the same way that you want to try to make sure that you have some of your major tenants visible to the street. When there are huge cranes that may be blocking signage of businesses in the area, that's a problem for them as well. So I don't know at what point we'll kind of talk about some of those more, other aspects of the project, but I do think that it's going to be critically important for you all to consider not only the environmental impacts that construction may have on businesses and residents in the area, but also ensuring, the viability of the plethora of businesses that are in the area during construction.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
May I ask a couple questions too?
Certainly may.
I'm sorry it's late, but I just have a couple. In the landscaping in the public space, is there thought about kind of rain garden type treatment or other kind of options that have to do with sustainability as part of those landscaping spaces?
Yeah, we actually on our call with our lead consultant this morning, we talked about maybe having some of these pockets treat some of that runoff when it makes sense. We have we're going to have a lot of other elements to wrangle with once we start getting a little deeper into the weeds with utilities and such. So.
Well, we do this all over the city, and one of the things, if you talk to any of our folks in our library, the best thing we ever did was put a rain garden outside of their building so that the building didn't flood. So sometimes it helps deal with water flows in the area when, on the sidewalks and that kind of thing. So it's good treatment, but it also can help address some other issues that can arise.
Area we have some great opportunities to do that.
Mm-hmm. Another thing, I actually have kind of found it fascinating to hear requests for wider and wider sidewalks. For so many years, people have said, "No, we don't want sidewalks, and don't go over 4 feet wide," or whatever. It's like, we do want comfortable walking spaces. Some of the most narrow points I think here are similar to some of the widest parts on the other part of Carroll Avenue. So it will be good to actually see it when we're out. The other thing just is we've been talking about the green aspects of the project. I'd like to just ask just for a moment about if the project doesn't go forward, the environmental impacts of continuing to have asphalt for truck delivery on the city's lot, and how much is there, if we didn't do anything and we left an asphalt area and there continued to be 18-wheelers and garbage trucks coming on the city's lot to service the co-op, how much square footage of green space could we actually end up getting if there, after you take out the area for maneuvering the large trucks? You don't have to get back to me right now, but to me, I know when I've looked at the various configurations, it's often a lot of pavement that is required for those.
Yeah, one of the bits of information I just have in front of me is that the existing, according to one of the survey drawings that we got, the existing impervious area is 29,337 square feet, just today. I can't go into detail, not knowing whether that it's an area that basically represents everything from the parking lot forward to Carroll Avenue. There are a few little zones where there's some planting near that split rail fence and over, but that's a lot of impervious surface, and everything that we're doing is trying to not just replace that, but replace that with something that contributes in a variety of ways,
right,
as well as treating the impervious surface element. I don't know the answer.
Well, I think it's an important thing to talk about. The fact right now is that that whole stretch is impermeable surface, and we do want to see green actually. The other question that sometimes comes up is if there's aspects that make sense for some kind of permeable pavement or permeable portions of the kind of hardscape that gets proposed. I know that sometimes there's some maintenance issues with those, and there's some places where that's used better than others. But throwing that out, if as you look at particular locations, if it makes sense as an option to continue to try to make this a little bit more receptive to water and green.
Yeah, and those are always options we consider. Having done enough microbial retention versus porous pavement, we're always able to treat a lot more by using rain gardens or microbial retention than the pavement. So sometimes it's a trade-off in terms of the expense versus the maintenance versus the look, but it is worth considering. And there are a number of unbound pavement systems.
We have been using some where we're protecting existing tree roots and that kind of thing, where we've been using some Flexipave or that kind of thing. I don't, when you're starting from just everything paved, you can get better systems. But but throwing that out just to be creative, if there seems to be an appropriate place, those might be some solutions.
An area we talked about earlier where we would have an extended soil panel to provide more soil area for the trees, that surface over that might be a prime spot for porous pavement. That helps add air, water to the tree roots below. So that's a great suggestion.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. And we're now going to enter the second round of council questions. Councilmember Kosiak.
I promise I don't have as many. Thank you. I just have two quick things, mostly to put on your radar more than anything for our future discussions. One of them is that a resident pinged me with a question regarding trees, and as you're looking at the light, kind of studying the light and the shadows, the capacity for trees to grow in this area in the front of the building if there's too much shade was one concern. So if you have any thoughts on trees being able to grow in that area, or as you're moving forward and you're looking at the light, considering what that impact might be.
Right. Well, fortunately, we have nature to look to. We can look for understory canopy trees that we find that are native that'll grow in a partially shaded environment. So yeah, we have a lot of options that we can look at for that spot. And most ornamental trees that we use that are native are understory trees. So along that streetscape environment, that's what we'll be looking at predominantly.
Okay. And my other question is related to sustainability. One thing I would really like to see next week, if possible, is a plan for the bus stop, because we do want to make sure that people are able to get to this location without driving. So I'd like to see plans for that as soon as possible. Thank you.
Councilmember Kovar.
I forgot to ask this, sorry. In the back alley, if that's what it's called, not the
service corridor.
The service corridor, there you go. The one that runs between them all, not the one that runs down parallel to the co-op. Is there thought to keeping that open so that it would almost be like a shaft so that the upper offices would have light coming in there? I don't remember hearing about that one way or the other.
Yes. So far, this is the best drawing I've got this evening to show it, but the light gray space between the co-op and our building is open.
I'm talking about the one that runs horizontal to, or perpendicular to that.
I'm sorry. You were talking about the horizontal one. That's the other service corridor.
Yeah.
No, that's within the building. We hadn't had that cut through to the roof. It's just at the ground floor.
Okay. Is that something that was ever considered? Or?
We're looking into our options for the upper story, and right now we're just calling it one large tenant space. So it's not multi-tenanted. I'm not sure that we'd need a hallway, so the light would only come down to the first floor anyway. Yeah. So we hadn't really considered that idea now.
Okay. I thank you, and thank you for being here with us tonight. I want to remind everyone that next Monday night we're going to receive presentation of the Tacoma Junction traffic studies, and then on Wednesday, starting at 6:30, the council will include a work session on the discussion of the Tacoma Junction site plan, traffic, and circulation. And I don't expect that to start a whole lot later than 6:30 because we just have a couple, I think, public hearings that are going to be relatively short. Skeptic. All right. Before closing, I would just like to thank all the staff members who helped put the information together that we use here at these council meetings. I'd like to thank the sound and video people for their work in making us look pretty and sound good, and our police department for the security they provide. All right. If there's nothing else, anything else?
And thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. We're adjourned.